Kodiak bear kills 3 friends during hunting trip, November 4th, 2024. The morning mist clung to the spruce and hemlock forests of Kodiak Island like a burial shroud, and perhaps it should have been taken as an omen. At 5:47 a.m. Alaska Standard Time on November 4th, 2024, Ethan Blake pressed the ignition of his modified Ford F-350, the diesel engine rumbling to life in the pre-dawn darkness outside his home in Kodiak, Alaska. The temperature gauge read 23 degrees Fahrenheit, and frost had already begun forming intricate patterns across his windshield, despite the truck having been parked in his heated garage just minutes before. Ethan Michael Blake, 34 years old, had lived on Kodiak Island his entire life, except for the 4 years he'd spent at the University of Alaska Fairbanks studying wildlife biology. Standing 6 feet 2 inches with the lean, weathered build of someone who spent more time outdoors than in, he possessed the kind of intimate knowledge of the island's terrain that could only come from decades of exploration. His dark brown hair, now showing the first threads of silver at the temples, was perpetually tousled by the island's persistent winds, and his green eyes held the quiet confidence of a man who understood both the beauty and the danger of the Alaskan wilderness. As the truck's heater began pushing warm air through the vents, Ethan reached for his phone and sent a quick text to his hunting partners. "Loading gear now. See you at the harbor in 20. The response from Connor Hill came almost immediately. "Already there with coffee. Jason's running late as usual." This exchange, captured in digital permanence, would later be analyzed by investigators trying to reconstruct the final 24 hours of 3 men's lives. Connor David Hill, 29 years old, represented the perfect contrast to Ethan's local expertise. A software engineer who had moved to Kodiak from Seattle just 18 months earlier, Connor stood 5 feet 10 inches with the pale complexion of someone who had spent most of his adult life indoors before discovering his passion for hunting and fishing. His blonde hair was kept meticulously short, and his blue eyes held an intensity that served him well both in debugging complex code and in tracking game through dense underbrush. What Connor lacked in wilderness experience, he compensated for with meticulous research and expensive equipment. His gear was always top of the line, his preparations thorough to the point of obsession. Connor had moved to Alaska following a messy divorce that had cost him half of everything he'd worked to build in the tech industry. The settlement had been generous enough to allow him to relocate anywhere he chose, and something about Alaska's vast emptiness had called to him during the darkest period of his life. He'd spent his first year on the island healing, learning to fish for salmon and halibut, gradually building friendships with locals who initially viewed him with the polite skepticism reserved for newcomers who might not survive their first winter. The third member of their group, Jason Anthony Ford, was in many ways the bridge between Ethan's local knowledge and Connor's outsider enthusiasm. 31 years old and originally from Anchorage, Jason had moved to Kodiak 5 years earlier to work as a pilot for Island Air Service, flying cargo runs and tourist charters throughout the Kodiak archipelago. His profession had given him a unique aerial perspective of the island's geography, and he could navigate by landmarks invisible to those confined to the ground. Standing 6 feet even, with the stocky build of a former high school wrestling champion, Jason possessed an irreverent sense of humor that could lighten even the most tense situations. Jason's thick black hair and brown eyes revealed his part Aleut heritage, a connection to the indigenous peoples who had called these islands home for thousands of years. His grandmother, Martha Ford, had been one of the last fluent speakers of the Alutiiq language, and she had filled his childhood with stories of the old ways, of reading the land and sea for signs that modern technology often missed. This cultural connection, combined with his pilot's training in weather pattern recognition, made him invaluable during their hunting expeditions. As Ethan loaded his gear into the truck bed, his movements were practiced and efficient. His rifle, A .300 Winchester Magnum with a loopholed scope had been his father's before him, and he had taken his first deer with it at age 12. The weapon was immaculately maintained, its wooden stock bearing the subtle scratches and wear patterns that spoke of decades of careful use. Beside it, he placed his day pack containing emergency supplies, first aid kit, emergency beacon, fire-starting materials, emergency shelter, and enough food for 3 days. His father, Robert Blake, had drilled into him from an early age that preparation was the difference between adventure and tragedy in the Alaskan wilderness. Robert Blake had been a legendary figure among Kodiak's hunting and fishing guides, a man who had survived 3 bear encounters during his 40-year career and had trained dozens of younger guides in wilderness safety. He had passed away from a heart attack 3 years earlier, leaving behind a legacy of respect for the island's apex predators and an almost supernatural ability to sense when conditions were becoming dangerous. Ethan carried his father's lessons with him like a compass, always knowing the direction back to safety. At the St. Paul harbor, Connor was indeed waiting with coffee, as promised. He stood beside his own vehicle, a Toyota Tundra that had been modified with every conceivable upgrade for off-road adventure. The truck's bed contained enough gear to supply a small expedition: portable weather station, satellite communicator, detailed topographical maps printed on waterproof paper, and hunting equipment that had cost more than most people's cars. Connor's rifle, a .338 Lapua Magnum with a high-end thermal scope, represented the pinnacle of modern hunting technology. "Morning, Ethan," Connor called out as the diesel truck pulled into the harbor parking lot. Steam rose from the paper cup in his hands, mixing with the fog rolling in from the Gulf of Alaska. "Beautiful morning for it. Weather Service is predicting partly cloudy with light winds, perfect visibility until about 3 this afternoon when a front's supposed to move through." Connor's weather obsession had become something of a running joke among the group, but his predictions were invariably accurate. He had invested in multiple weather monitoring applications and maintained a spreadsheet tracking local weather patterns, cross-referencing official forecasts with his own observations. This morning's forecast called for ideal hunting conditions, minimal wind to carry human scent, good visibility for long-range shooting, and comfortable temperatures that would keep game animals active during daylight hours. Jason arrived 15 minutes later, his battered pickup truck sliding into the parking spot with the casual precision of someone who had learned to drive on ice. Unlike his companions, Jason traveled light, carrying only essential gear and trusting in his ability to adapt to changing conditions. His rifle, a .30-06 Springfield that had belonged to his grandfather, was a simple but reliable weapon that had taken dozens of animals over the years. "Sorry I'm late," Jason announced as he climbed out of his truck. "Had to swing by the hangar and file a flight plan for Thursday. Got a charter taking some photographers out to photograph the bears at Terror Bay." The irony of this statement would not be lost on investigators later. The 3 men spent the next hour loading their gear onto the Aleutian Dream, a 28-foot aluminum fishing boat that Ethan had inherited from his father. The vessel was perfectly suited for navigating the waters around Kodiak Island, with a shallow draft that allowed access to remote beaches and inlets, and enough range to reach hunting areas far from any human presence. Ethan had upgraded the electronics over the years, installing GPS navigation, fish finders, and VHF radio equipment that would prove crucial in the events to come. Their destination was the southwestern peninsula of Kodiak Island, an area locally known as Terror Bay Peninsula, though the name appeared on no official maps. The peninsula stretched roughly 15 miles into the Gulf of Alaska, its interior dominated by dense forests of Sitka spruce and thick underbrush that provided perfect habitat for both deer and the massive brown bears that hunted them. The area was accessible only by boat or float plane, and its remote location meant that hunting parties rarely encountered other humans. Terror Bay had earned its unofficial name from early Russian fur traders who had lost several men to bear attacks in the area during the 1800s. The indigenous Alutiiq people had their own name for the peninsula, roughly translated as the place where the great brown spirits hunt, and their traditional stories spoke of bears in the area that grew to enormous size and demonstrated unusual intelligence and aggression. Modern biologists attributed the peninsula's large bear population to the abundance of salmon runs and the isolation that allowed bears to grow to their full potential without human interference. As the Aleutian Dream pulled away from the harbor at 7:23 a.m., the three friends were in high spirits. The early morning sun had begun burning off the fog, revealing the stunning beauty of Kodiak's coastline. Steep mountains rose directly from the ocean, their peaks capped with early snow that glowed pink and orange in the dawn light. Sea otters floated in kelp beds near the shore, while bald eagles circled overhead, their distinctive white heads brilliant against the blue sky. The journey to Terror Bay Peninsula would take approximately 2.5 hours, following a route that hugged the coastline before cutting across open water to reach their destination. Ethan handled the boat with the easy confidence of someone who had made this trip countless times, while Connor monitored the GPS and weather instruments, and Jason regaled them with stories from his recent charter flights. "Took a group of wildlife photographers out to the Red River area last week," Jason was saying as they rounded Cape Chiniak. "They were specifically looking for large males before they go into hibernation. Found one that had to be pushing 1,500 pounds, maybe more. Biggest bear I've ever seen, and I've been flying over this island for 5 years. He paused to light a cigarette, cupping his hands against the wind. The interesting thing was his behavior. Most bears this time of year are focused on feeding, putting on those last few pounds before winter. This one seemed different. More alert, more aggressive. The photographers couldn't get within 200 yards of him before he'd stand up and stare them down." Connor looked up from his instruments. 1,500 pounds? That seems excessive even for a large male. "I'm telling you what I saw," Jason replied, "and I've got photographs to prove it. The bear was standing next to a standard 55-gallon drum that someone had left on the beach, probably fell off a cargo ship. The drum came up to about the middle of his chest when he was on all fours." Ethan nodded thoughtfully. "Dad used to talk about bears like that. Said there were always a few individuals each generation that grew beyond the normal size parameters. They become super dominant, basically ruling entire territories. The thing is, bears that size need a lot of food to maintain their weight, which makes them more dangerous around humans." The conversation about exceptionally large bears would prove prophetic in ways none of them could imagine. As their boat carved through the increasingly choppy waters of the Gulf of Alaska, they were heading directly toward an encounter with exactly the type of animal Jason had described. Alaska Department of Fish and Game records would later show that the peninsula was home to one of the largest brown bears ever documented in the region, an animal that local Alutiiq elders had been warning about for months. Thomas Kanatak, a 67-year-old Alutiiq elder and traditional knowledge keeper, had been trying to communicate with wildlife authorities about unusual bear behavior in the Terror Bay area since early summer. Thomas lived in the village of Larsen Bay, roughly 20 miles from Terror Bay Peninsula, and he maintained traditional hunting and fishing sites throughout the region. His family had been using the peninsula for subsistence hunting and fishing for generations, and they possessed an intimate knowledge of local wildlife patterns. According to Thomas, the bear known to his people as Takuka, meaning the Dark One, had been exhibiting unprecedented territorial behavior since late spring. Traditional Alutiiq hunting patterns called for avoiding certain areas during specific times of year when bears were most active and aggressive. but Takuka had expanded his territory far beyond normal boundaries and was demonstrating hunting behaviors that elder knowledge had never documented. "This bear, he hunts like a killer whale," Thomas had told Sarah Chen, a wildlife biologist with the Alaska Department of Fish and Game, during a meeting in early October. "Killer whales. They plan their attacks. They work together. They learn from each experience. This bear, he does the same thing. He studies the humans who come to his territory. He watches them from far away, learns their patterns, then he attacks when they are most vulnerable." Sarah Chen, 38 years old and one of the most respected bear researchers in Alaska, had initially been skeptical of Thomas's reports. Her doctoral research had focused on brown bear territorial behavior, and she had spent 12 years studying the bears of Kodiak Island. In her experience, bears were generally predictable in their behavior patterns, following seasonal routines tied to food availability and breeding cycles. Reports of individual bears exhibiting unusual intelligence or planning capabilities were typically explained by coincidence or observer bias. However, Thomas's reports had been corroborated by other traditional knowledge keepers, and Sarah had begun her own investigation in late September. Using trail cameras and GPS collar data from several bears in the region, she had documented unusual movement patterns that suggested one individual was indeed exhibiting atypical territorial behavior. The bear in question appeared to be patrolling a much larger territory than normal and was spending significant time in areas where humans were most likely to encounter him. Sarah's preliminary data suggested that the bear was a large male, probably between 8 and 12 years old, at the peak of his physical condition and territorial aggression. GPS collar data indicated that he was spending most of his time in the dense forest interior of Terror Bay Peninsula, an area that was virtually inaccessible to researchers, but was crisscrossed with game trails that hunters often used. Most disturbing, the bear's movement patterns showed a clear correlation with human activity in the area. He appeared to be monitoring hunting parties and positioning himself along their most likely routes. On November 1st, just 3 days before Ethan, Connor, and Jason would depart for their hunting trip, Sarah had submitted a recommendation to the Alaska Department of Fish and Game that Terror Bay Peninsula be temporarily closed to hunting until the unusual bear behavior could be better understood. The recommendation was still being reviewed by department administrators when the three friends loaded their gear onto the Aleutian Dream. The bureaucratic delays that prevented Sarah's recommendation from being implemented would later become the subject of intense scrutiny. Alaska's hunting regulations were complex, involving multiple agencies and requiring extensive documentation before hunting areas could be closed to public access. Emergency closures were possible, but they required evidence of immediate danger to human life, and the unusual behavior patterns documented by Sarah and Thomas were considered insufficient grounds for such drastic action. As the Aleutian Dream approached Terror Bay Peninsula at 9:47 a.m., the three friends were completely unaware of the potential danger awaiting them. The morning had continued to develop into perfect hunting conditions: light winds, excellent visibility, and comfortable temperatures in the low 30s. Connor's weather monitoring showed high pressure dominating the region, with no significant weather changes expected until late afternoon. Terror Bay Peninsula presented itself to them as a pristine wilderness paradise. The coastline was dominated by steep cliffs and narrow gravel beaches, while the interior rose gradually through dense forest toward peaks that topped out at nearly 3,000 feet. Streams carved their way through the landscape, creating natural travel corridors for both wildlife and humans. The forest itself was typical of Kodiak Island: massive Sitka spruce trees interspersed with thick underbrush that could reduce visibility to mere yards in some areas. Ethan guided the boat toward a small protected inlet on the peninsula's eastern shore, a location he had been using as a base camp for hunting trips since his teenage years. The inlet provided protection from ocean swells and had a small gravel beach suitable for pulling the boat ashore. More importantly, the location offered access to a network of game trails that led into the peninsula's interior, where large Sitka blacktail deer could be found feeding in the natural meadows and clearings. "This is perfect," Connor announced as they began unloading their gear onto the beach. "GPS shows we're exactly where we plan to be, and the terrain looks ideal for spotting game at distance." He was already setting up his portable weather station, a collection of instruments that would monitor wind speed, direction, temperature, and barometric pressure throughout their stay. Jason was more focused on reading the immediate environment, scanning the tree line and checking for signs of recent animal activity. His pilot training had taught him to continuously assess his surroundings for potential hazards, and his Alutiiq heritage provided him with traditional skills for reading the land. What he saw concerned him slightly, though he couldn't quite articulate why. "Lot of bear sign," Jason observed as he examined the beach. Fresh tracks in the sand showed that at least 2 different bears had been using the area recently, including one set of tracks that was significantly larger than any he had seen before. "These tracks here, they're probably not more than a day or 2 old." Ethan joined him in examining the tracks. As someone who had been hunting on Kodiak Island his entire life, he could read bear sign like a book. The larger tracks showed a front paw print that measured nearly 12 inches long and 8 inches wide, indicating a bear of exceptional size. More concerning were the depth and clarity of the prints, which suggested the bear had been moving slowly and deliberately, rather than simply passing through the area. "Big male," Ethan agreed. "Probably over 1,000 pounds. But that's not unusual for this time of year. They're putting on weight for hibernation, and the big males get territorial about feeding areas." He straightened up and looked toward the forest. "We'll make noise when we're moving through thick cover, keep our rifles ready, and follow standard bear safety protocols. Same as always." Connor had finished setting up his weather station and was consulting his detailed topographical maps. He had spent weeks planning their route, identifying the most promising hunting areas based on satellite imagery and local wildlife reports. His plan called for them to establish a base camp near the beach, then make day trips into the interior to hunt specific areas before returning to the safety of their boat each evening. "I've identified 3 primary hunting areas," Connor explained as he spread out his maps on a flat boulder. "The first is about 2 miles inland, following this creek drainage. Satellite imagery shows several natural meadows where deer should be feeding. The second area is further north, maybe 4 miles from here, where the forest opens up into larger clearings. The third option is south along the coast, where we can hunt the transitions between forest and beach." Jason studied the maps while continuing to monitor their surroundings. His unease was growing, though he couldn't identify any specific threat. The forest seemed too quiet for his liking, lacking the typical sounds of small animals and birds that should be active during the morning hours. In his experience, unusual quiet often indicated the presence of a large predator that was keeping other wildlife alert and hidden. "Let's start with the creek drainage," Jason suggested. "It gives us multiple exit routes if we need them, and we can work our way back toward the boat as the day progresses." He didn't mention his real reason for preferring that route. It would keep them closer to their only means of escape from the peninsula. The 3 friends spent the next hour setting up their base camp. Using Connor's military surplus equipment, they established a comfortable temporary shelter with sleeping arrangements for 3, cooking facilities, and storage for their gear. The campsite was positioned to provide good visibility of the beach and water approaches while being concealed from the forest side by natural vegetation. Ethan took charge of food security, properly storing all scented items in bear-proof containers and ensuring their cooking area was located downwind from their sleeping area. His father had taught him that bears possessed a sense of smell 7 times more acute than a bloodhound, and food odors could attract them from miles away. Every precaution taken in bear country was potentially life-saving. At 11:15 a.m., the 3 hunters began their trek into the interior of Terror Bay Peninsula, following the creek drainage that Connor had identified as their primary hunting area. They moved in single file with Ethan leading, his decades of experience allowing him to find and follow game trails that were invisible to less experienced eyes. Connor followed in the middle position, his expensive GPS unit tracking their exact route and recording waypoints every 100 yards. Jason brought up the rear, his pilot's training keeping him constantly aware of their surroundings and potential threats. The creek they followed was typical of Kodiak Island watersheds, clear, cold water flowing over gravel and granite, creating pools where salmon had spawned earlier in the season. The banks were lined with dense vegetation, creating a natural corridor through the forest that wildlife used as a highway between feeding and resting areas. Game trails crisscrossed the creek at regular intervals, and fresh deer tracks in the soft earth showed that their target animals were indeed using the area. What none of them noticed was that they were being watched from the moment they entered the forest. High on a ridge approximately 800 yards away, partially concealed behind a massive fallen Sitka spruce, Takuka observed their progress with the kind of focused attention that Thomas Kanatak had tried to warn authorities about. The bear had been aware of their approach since the boat's engine had first become audible, and he had positioned himself to monitor their activities while remaining undetected. At an estimated weight of 1,300 pounds and standing nearly 5 feet tall at the shoulder, Takuka represented the apex of brown bear evolution. His dark brown coat was thick and healthy, showing the physical condition of an animal that had never known food scarcity or serious injury. His massive head housed a brain that had learned to associate human activity with opportunity rather than threat, and his physical strength was sufficient to kill a moose with a single swipe of his paw. Takuka's hunting strategy had evolved over several seasons of encounters with humans in his territory. Unlike most bears, which avoid human contact whenever possible, he had learned that humans often carried food and were relatively weak and slow compared to his usual prey. More importantly, he had observed that humans became predictable in their behavior, following established trails and making noise that allowed him to track their movements from considerable distances. The bear's intelligence extended to understanding human technology. He had learned to avoid areas where trail cameras were positioned, and he had observed that humans relied heavily on certain equipment that could be rendered useless through direct attack. His strategy involved attacking swiftly and destroying any equipment that might be used to call for help, then pursuing any humans who attempted to escape. As the 3 hunters made their way deeper into the forest, Takuka began his own movement, following a parallel ridge that allowed him to monitor their progress while remaining undetected. His massive size, which would normally make stealth impossible, was offset by his intimate knowledge of the terrain and his ability to move silently through the dense underbrush that would create noise and confusion for human prey. At 12:30 p.m., Ethan called a halt to their progress. They had covered nearly 2 miles of difficult terrain and were approaching the first of the natural meadows that Connor had identified on his satellite imagery. The meadow was approximately 3 acres in size, surrounded by dense forest and bisected by the creek they had been following. Fresh deer tracks and droppings showed that animals were using the area regularly for feeding. "This looks perfect," Connor whispered as they approached the meadow's edge. Through his high-powered binoculars, he could see several game trails leading into the open area from different directions. "We can set up here and watch for deer moving between feeding and bedding areas." Jason was studying the surrounding forest with his naked eyes, his unease continuing to grow. The silence that had bothered him earlier was even more pronounced here, and he noticed that bird activity was completely absent despite the ideal habitat. In his experience, areas where predators were active showed distinct patterns of prey-animal behavior, and what he was observing suggested the presence of something that had every other animal in the area on high alert. "Something's not right," Jason said quietly. "Look around. No birds, no squirrels, no small animal activity at all. In habitat this good, we should be seeing and hearing signs of life everywhere." Ethan paused his scanning of the meadow to consider Jason's observation. His friend was right. The forest was exhibiting the kind of silence that usually indicated the recent passage of a large predator, most likely a bear, given the tracks they had seen at the beach and the season's timing. However, bears typically moved through areas without establishing the kind of lasting presence that would keep other wildlife suppressed for extended periods. "Could be a bear passed through recently," Ethan acknowledged, "but we're armed and alert. As long as we stay together and keep making noise when we move, we should be fine." Connor was less concerned with wildlife behavior than with the hunting opportunity presented by the meadow. His research had identified this as a prime location for intercepting deer, and the weather conditions remained perfect for long-range shooting. Through his spotting scope, he was already identifying shooting positions and range estimates for different parts of the meadow. "Let's give it an hour," Connor suggested. "If deer are using this area, they should start moving into the meadow for afternoon feeding within the next 60 to 90 minutes. The three hunters established their observation position at the edge of the meadow, using fallen logs and natural vegetation to create concealed shooting positions. Ethan and Jason positioned themselves with good visibility of the main game trails, while Connor set up his rifle with its thermal scope to monitor the entire meadow for heat signatures that might indicate approaching animals. What they didn't know was that Takuka had been using this meadow as his own hunting ground for the past 2 weeks. The bear had learned that deer feeding in the open area were vulnerable to ambush attacks from the forest edge, and he had perfected a technique of approaching from downwind while remaining concealed in the dense underbrush. His presence in the area was exactly why other wildlife had evacuated the immediate vicinity. At 1:45 p.m., Connor's thermal scope detected the first heat signature approaching the meadow. Through the dense forest on the far side of the clearing, a large, warm-blooded animal was moving slowly toward the open area. Connor assumed it was a deer preparing to feed, and he alerted his companions to prepare for a potential shot. "Movement on the north side," Connor whispered into his radio. They had established communications using small handheld radios to coordinate their hunting efforts while maintaining the silence necessary to avoid spooking game animals. Large heat signature, moving slowly toward the meadow edge. Ethan and Jason adjusted their positions to focus on the area Connor had indicated. Through their binoculars, they could see movement in the underbrush, but the dense vegetation prevented clear identification of the animal. The size and movement pattern seemed consistent with a large deer, possibly a mature buck that would represent an ideal hunting opportunity. The heat signature continued to approach the meadow edge, moving with the deliberate caution typical of prey animals entering open areas where they would be vulnerable to predator attack. Connor tracked the movement through his thermal scope, waiting for the animal to emerge into the clearing where a clear shot would be possible. At 1:52 p.m., Takuka emerged from the forest into the meadow, and the three hunters immediately realized their mistake. Instead of the deer they had been expecting, they were looking at the largest brown bear any of them had ever encountered. Standing nearly 5 feet tall at the shoulder and stretching almost 9 feet from nose to tail, the bear represented an apex predator in his absolute prime. "Jesus Christ," Jason breathed into his radio, his voice barely audible even through the electronic amplification. "That's not a deer." Takuka paused at the meadow's edge, his massive head turning to scan the area with the methodical thoroughness of an animal that had learned to identify potential threats and opportunities. His small eyes, nearly invisible in his massive skull, seemed to pause for just a moment longer than normal on the area where the three hunters were concealed. Ethan slowly reached for his rifle, moving with the careful deliberation of someone who understood that any sudden movement might trigger an aggressive response from the bear. His .300 Winchester Magnum was loaded with premium hunting ammunition designed for large game, but he had never imagined using it against a bear of this size at such close range. Connor was fighting the urge to panic as he watched the bear through his thermal scope. The animal's heat signature was massive, indicating a level of muscle mass and body weight that exceeded anything in his research about brown bear size parameters. More concerning was the bear's behavior. Instead of the typical feeding or foraging activity expected in a meadow, the animal appeared to be hunting. "Nobody move," Ethan whispered into his radio. "Bears this size can cover 40 yards in under 3 seconds. If he charges, we'll have maybe 2 seconds to get shots on target." Jason was already calculating escape routes while maintaining his observation of the bear. His pilot training had taught him to always have contingency plans, and the current situation definitely qualified as an emergency requiring multiple backup options. The nearest tall tree suitable for climbing was approximately 30 yards behind their position, but reaching it would require crossing open ground where they would be visible to the bear. Takuka had completed his initial scan of the meadow and was now moving into the open area with the confident stride of an animal that had never encountered anything capable of challenging his dominance. His massive paws made no sound on the soft grass, and his movement demonstrated the fluid grace that made brown bears surprisingly effective pursuit predators, despite their size. The bear's hunting strategy became apparent as he positioned himself in the center of the meadow. Rather than foraging for food, he was establishing a command position that would allow him to detect and intercept any prey animals that might enter the clearing. His behavior indicated an intelligence and tactical awareness that none of the hunters had ever observed in wildlife. At 2:03 p.m., Takuka's behavior changed abruptly. The bear stopped his movement and turned to face directly toward the hunter's concealed position, his massive head raised and nostrils flaring as he tested the air for scent. Despite their precautions with wind direction and scent control, something had alerted him to their presence. "He knows we're here," Connor whispered, his voice tight with controlled fear. Through his thermal scope, he could see the bear's body language changing from casual confidence to active hunting mode. The animal's posture became more aggressive, his ears forward and his lips beginning to curl back from teeth that seemed impossibly large. Ethan was slowly bringing his rifle into shooting position, moving with the deliberate care of someone who understood that their lives now depended on precision and timing. His father had always taught him that bears were generally predictable in their behavior, but this animal was demonstrating patterns that fell outside normal parameters. "When I count to 3, we all stand up and back away slowly," Ethan instructed through the radio. "Keep your rifles ready, but don't point them at the bear unless he charges. We're going to try to appear large and intimidating while giving him space to leave the area." Jason was already shifting his weight to his feet, preparing to follow Ethan's instructions while keeping his rifle accessible for emergency use. His heart rate had increased dramatically, and he was fighting the adrenaline response that could cloud judgment during critical situations. His Alutiiq heritage included traditional knowledge about bear behavior, and everything his grandmother had taught him suggested that this encounter was already beyond normal parameters. 1, Ethan counted over the radio. Takuka was now facing directly toward their position, his massive body tensed for action. The bear's eyes, small but intensely focused, had located their hiding spot despite their camouflage and concealment efforts. His body language indicated that he was evaluating them not as a potential threat to avoid, but as prey to be hunted. 2, Ethan continued, his finger moving to the safety of his rifle. The bear began moving toward their position, not with the bluff charge typical of bears attempting to establish dominance, but with the purposeful stride of a predator closing distance for an attack. His massive size allowed him to cover ground with surprising speed, and the hunters suddenly realized that their escape options were rapidly diminishing. 3, Ethan called, and all 3 men rose from their concealed positions simultaneously. The effect on Takuka was immediate and catastrophic. Instead of being deterred by the sudden appearance of 3 humans, the bear accelerated his approach, dropping into the efficient loping gait that brown bears use for pursuit hunting. His massive paws threw up clods of earth as he covered the distance between them with terrifying speed. "He's charging!" Jason yelled into his radio, abandoning whispered communications as the situation deteriorated beyond any hope of avoiding confrontation. Ethan brought his rifle to his shoulder and fired the first shot at 2:04 p.m., the .300 Winchester Magnum's report echoing across the meadow like thunder. The bullet struck Takuka in the chest, and the hunters could see the impact through their scopes, but the bear's charge continued without any apparent effect from what should have been a devastating wound. Connor fired his .338 Lapua Magnum 3 seconds later, the more powerful cartridge designed specifically for large, dangerous game. His shot placement was precise, striking the bear in the shoulder area that should have broken bone and dropped the animal immediately. Instead, Takuka adjusted his direction slightly and continued his charge with undiminished speed. Jason's .30-06 Springfield added a 3rd bullet to the bear, this one striking the animal's massive skull with enough force to stop most any creature on Earth. The bullet's impact was clearly visible, but Takuka showed no signs of being affected by wounds that should have been instantly fatal. "Run!" Ethan screamed as he realized that their firearms were not going to stop the charging bear. All 3 hunters turned and began sprinting toward the forest edge behind their position, abandoning their gear and focusing entirely on escape. Takuka covered the final 30 yards to their former position in approximately 2 seconds, his massive size allowing him to maintain pursuit speed that matched or exceeded the human's desperate flight. The bear's roar, when it finally came, was a sound unlike anything the hunters had ever heard, a combination of rage, pain, and predatory fury that seemed to shake the very air around them. Ethan reached the forest edge first, his lifetime of experience in dense vegetation allowing him to navigate the underbrush while maintaining maximum speed. Behind him, he could hear Connor crashing through the vegetation with the desperation of someone who knew that slowing down meant death. Jason's position was unknown, and Ethan's radio attempts to contact him received no response. Connor's expensive GPS equipment was forgotten as he focused entirely on following Ethan through the maze of fallen logs and dense underbrush that characterized the Kodiak Island forest floor. Branches tore at his clothing and equipment, and his breathing was already becoming labored from the combination of fear and exertion. Behind him, the sounds of Takuka's pursuit were getting closer rather than fading. Jason had made the mistake of attempting to reload his rifle while running, a decision that cost him precious seconds and ultimately sealed his fate. As he struggled to chamber a fresh cartridge while navigating the forest obstacles, Takuka closed the distance between them to mere yards. At 2:06 p.m., Takuka caught Jason Ford at the base of a large Sitka spruce tree. Jason's final radio transmission, partially garbled by static and the sounds of his own labored breathing, was recorded by Connor's equipment. "He's got me! Tell my family I—" The transmission ended in a combination of static and sounds that the 2 surviving hunters would never forget. Ethan and Connor continued their desperate flight through the forest, their only hope now being to reach their boat before the bear could track them down. Behind them, the sounds of Takuka's attack on Jason continued for approximately 4 minutes, a duration that seemed like hours to the terrified survivors. The forest that had seemed like a peaceful wilderness paradise just hours earlier had transformed into a nightmare maze of obstacles and dangers. Fallen logs that reached chest height forced them to climb or detour, while dense underbrush reduced visibility to mere feet and created constant opportunities for the bear to approach undetected. Connor's physical conditioning, adequate for his sedentary lifestyle in Seattle, was proving insufficient for the demands of escape through trackless wilderness. His breathing became increasingly labored, and his legs began to cramp from the unaccustomed exertion. The expensive equipment that had seemed so important earlier was now abandoned piece by piece as he focused entirely on survival. "Wait!" Connor gasped into his radio as he struggled to keep up with Ethan's pace. "I can't maintain this speed." Ethan faced the most difficult decision of his life. His wilderness experience told him that stopping or slowing down would likely result in death for both of them, but abandoning his friend went against every principle his father had taught him about loyalty and responsibility in dangerous situations. "We have to keep moving," Ethan responded over the radio. "That bear will track us by scent and sound. Our only chance is to reach the boat before he catches up." The two survivors continued their flight toward the coast, following a route that Ethan hoped would intersect with the creek drainage they had used earlier. His plan was to follow the creek back to their base camp, retrieve essential supplies, and escape by boat before Takuka could locate them. At 2:23 p.m., the forest behind them erupted in the sounds of renewed pursuit. Takuka had completed his attack on Jason and was now following their trail with the methodical persistence of an apex predator that had identified preferred prey. The bear's ability to track by scent meant that he could follow their route even if they managed to stay ahead of direct visual contact. Ethan's radio crackled with Connor's increasingly desperate communications. "I can hear him behind us." "How far to the boat?" "Maybe 2 miles through the forest, or 3 if we follow the creek," Ethan replied while maintaining his rapid pace through the underbrush. "We have to assume he's faster than us on open ground, so we need to use the thick vegetation to slow him down." Connor's response was interrupted by the sound of a massive tree being pushed over, the crack of splintering wood clearly audible through the forest, even at their distance from the bear. Takuka was demonstrating the kind of raw physical power that could reshape the landscape itself, removing obstacles that might protect his prey. At 2:31 p.m., they reached the creek drainage that had been their route into the peninsula's interior. The familiar waterway represented their best hope for navigation back to their base camp, but it also provided Takuka with an easy trail to follow as he pursued them. "We follow the creek," Ethan decided. "It's our fastest route to the boat, and the water might help mask our scent trail." The two survivors began their desperate journey back toward the coast, wading down the center of the creek to minimize the scent trail they left for the pursuing bear. The cold water quickly soaked through their boots and pants, but the discomfort was insignificant compared to the terror of being hunted by an animal that had already killed their friend. Connor's radio equipment, despite being top of the line, was beginning to malfunction due to water damage and the impacts from his flight through the forest. His GPS unit had a cracked screen, and his satellite communicator was missing entirely, probably torn from his pack during his desperate escape. "My emergency beacon is gone," Connor reported over his failing radio. "Equipment must have been damaged or lost during the run." Ethan checked his own emergency supplies and found that his satellite communicator was still functional, though the device would require several minutes to acquire satellite connection before it could transmit their distress signal. The delay represented a critical vulnerability. Takuka could easily cover several miles during the time required for rescue coordination. At 2:45 p.m., they heard the sound of Takuka entering the creek drainage behind them. The bear's massive size created distinctive sounds as he moved through the water, splashing that indicated he was not concerned with stealth, and the scraping of his claws against rocks as he navigated the stream bed. "He's in the creek," Ethan whispered into his radio. "Maybe half a mile behind us, moving fast." Connor's physical condition was deteriorating rapidly. The combination of fear, cold water, and unaccustomed physical exertion was creating muscle cramps and respiratory distress that slowed his progress through the creek. His face had gone pale, and his movements were becoming increasingly unsteady. "I don't think I can make it to the boat," Connor admitted over the radio. "You should go ahead without me." Ethan refused to consider abandoning his friend, despite the tactical logic of Connor's suggestion. His father's training had emphasized that survival in the wilderness required group cohesion and mutual support, principles that became even more important during emergency situations. "We stay together," Ethan replied firmly. "Help me activate the emergency beacon, then we continue toward the boat as fast as possible." They paused for approximately 90 seconds while Ethan attempted to activate his satellite communicator. The device required a clear view of the sky to acquire satellite signals, but the dense forest canopy reduced the effectiveness of the antenna. After several attempts, the unit indicated that it had achieved partial satellite lock and was attempting to transmit their distress signal. The emergency message transmitted at 2:47 p.m. contained their GPS coordinates, the nature of their emergency, bear attack with fatality, and a request for immediate rescue assistance. The message was received by the U.S. Coast Guard Rescue Coordination Center in Juneau, automatically triggering a search and rescue response protocol that would bring multiple agencies into action. However, the remoteness of Terror Bay Peninsula meant that the fastest possible rescue response would require a minimum of 45 minutes to reach their location. Coast Guard helicopters would need to launch from Kodiak, while Alaska State Troopers would coordinate with local resources to mount a comprehensive search and rescue operation. As Ethan and Connor resumed their flight down the creek, they were unaware that help was already being mobilized. Master Chief Petty Officer Michael Torres, watch commander at the Coast Guard station in Kodiak, had immediately recognized the severity of their situation and had authorized the launch of an MH-60 Jayhawk helicopter with a full rescue crew. "We have a distress signal from Terror Bay Peninsula," Torres announced over the station's communication system. "Bear attack with confirmed fatality, 2 survivors requesting immediate extraction. Launch SAR Bird with full crew and medical team." The Coast Guard's response was professional and immediate, but the reality of Alaskan search and rescue operations meant that even the fastest response would take time to coordinate and execute. Weather conditions would need to be assessed, flight plans filed, and rescue personnel briefed on the specific challenges of extracting survivors from dense forest terrain. At 2:52 p.m., Takuka's pursuit sounds were getting noticeably closer. The bear's size and strength allowed him to move through the creek drainage faster than the exhausted humans, and his enhanced senses meant that he could track them even if they managed to stay ahead of visual contact. Connor stumbled and fell face-first into the creek, his exhaustion finally overwhelming his ability to maintain the pace necessary for escape. The cold water immediately soaked through his remaining clothing, and his radio equipment finally failed completely due to water damage. "Connor's down," Ethan reported over his own radio, though he wasn't sure if anyone was monitoring their frequency. He helped his friend back to his feet and assessed his condition. Hypothermia was setting in, and Connor's coordination was becoming increasingly impaired. "Leave me here," Connor whispered through chattering teeth. "Find a tree to climb or hide until help arrives." Ethan evaluated their situation with the analytical skills his father had taught him for wilderness emergencies. Connor was no longer capable of maintaining the pace necessary to reach their boat before the bear caught up. Attempting to continue together would likely result in both of their deaths, while leaving Connor might give him a chance to find defensible terrain. At 2:55 p.m., Ethan made the decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life. "There's a large spruce about 50 yards ahead on the right bank," he told Connor. "The branches are low enough for you to climb even in your condition. Get up as high as possible and wait for rescue." Connor nodded his understanding and began struggling toward the tree Ethan had indicated. His movements were slow and unsteady, but the adrenaline of fear provided enough energy for the short distance to potential safety. Ethan continued down the creek toward their base camp, pushing himself to maximum speed now that he was no longer constrained by Connor's slower pace. His plan was to reach their boat, attempt to contact rescue authorities by marine radio, and then return to assist in Connor's rescue if possible. The sound of Takuka's approach continued to grow louder behind them, and Ethan could now hear individual details of the bear's movement, the splash of water, the scraping of claws on rocks, and occasionally a low rumbling sound that might have been growling or heavy breathing. Connor reached the base of the large Sitka spruce at 2:57 p.m. and began his desperate attempt to climb beyond the bear's reach. His cold, numb fingers struggled to grip the rough bark, and his exhausted muscles trembled with the effort of lifting his body weight. Branch by branch, he climbed higher into the tree, driven by the knowledge that failure meant certain death. Ethan heard Connor's radio transmission just as he was disappearing into the tree. "I'm climbing. Keep going to the boat." The words were barely audible through the static and water damage to the radio equipment, but they represented Connor's final communication with his friend. At 3:01 p.m., Takuka reached the area where the two survivors had separated. The bear's enhanced senses immediately detected that his prey had divided, and he faced a tactical decision about which target to pursue. His intelligence allowed him to evaluate the options. One human was climbing a tree nearby, while the other was continuing toward the coast. The bear chose to deal with the immediate target first. Takuka approached the base of the spruce tree where Connor was climbing and reared up on his hind legs to assess the situation. Standing on his rear legs, the massive bear reached nearly 10 feet tall, bringing him within striking distance of branches that Connor had thought were safely beyond reach. Connor was approximately 15 feet above the ground when Takuka reached the tree. The bear's massive size and strength allowed him to shake the entire tree by pushing against the trunk, making it nearly impossible for Connor to maintain his grip on the branches. Ethan heard Connor's final screams echoing through the forest behind him as he approached his base camp. The sounds lasted for approximately 2 minutes before they were replaced by the kind of silence that needed no explanation. At 3:08 p.m., Ethan reached their base camp on the beach. Their gear was exactly as they had left it, and the Aleutian Dream was still pulled up on the gravel beach where they had landed that morning. The normalcy of the scene provided a surreal contrast to the horror of the previous hour. Ethan immediately powered up the boat's marine radio and began broadcasting distress calls on emergency frequencies. His training in marine communications allowed him to provide clear, precise information about his location and the nature of the emergency. "Mayday, mayday, mayday. This is the Aleutian Dream calling Coast Guard Kodiak. Bear attack at Terror Bay Peninsula with 2 fatalities. Single survivor requesting immediate evacuation." The response came within seconds. "Aleutian Dream, this is Coast Guard Kodiak. We copy your mayday and have SAR helicopter en route to your position. Estimated arrival time is 15 minutes. Are you injured and in immediate danger?" "Negative on injuries, but the bear is still in the area and extremely aggressive. I'm at my boat on the beach, but I don't know if this location is safe." "Copy that, Aleutian Dream. Maintain your current position if possible. SAR crew is briefed on bear threat and will coordinate safe extraction. Ethan spent the next few minutes loading essential gear into his boat while maintaining radio contact with the Coast Guard helicopter. His plan was to be ready for immediate departure if Takuka appeared on the beach before the rescue helicopter arrived. At 3:23 p.m., the distinctive sound of helicopter rotors became audible approaching from the east. The Coast Guard MH-60 Jayhawk appeared over the water, its bright orange and white paint scheme clearly visible against the grey sky. The helicopter's arrival represented salvation, but it also marked the beginning of a massive search and rescue operation. The helicopter crew included Aircraft Commander Lieutenant Sarah Kim, co-pilot Lieutenant Junior Grade David Chen, Flight Mechanic Petty Officer Second Class Tony Rodriguez, and Rescue Swimmer Petty Officer First Class James Mitchell. Each crew member was highly trained in high-risk rescue operations, but bear attacks represented one of the most dangerous scenarios in Alaskan search and rescue. Lieutenant Kim established radio contact with Ethan while the helicopter hovered offshore. Aleutian Dream, this is Coast Guard SAR 6031. We have you in sight on the beach. Can you confirm the bear is not currently visible in your immediate area? Ethan scanned the tree line behind his position while maintaining radio contact. Coast Guard 6031, negative on bear sighting, but he could be anywhere in the forest. The animal is extremely large and aggressive, and he killed both of my companions. The helicopter crew faced a tactical decision about how to extract Ethan safely. Landing on the beach would position the aircraft in a vulnerable location where it could be attacked by the bear, while hover extraction would require exposing the rescue swimmer to ground-level danger. Flight Mechanic Rodriguez was lowered to the beach on a rescue hoist, while the helicopter maintained a hover position that would allow rapid ascent if the bear appeared. Rodriguez quickly assessed Ethan's condition, confirmed that he was physically uninjured, and prepared him for extraction. "Sir, we're going to get you out of here right now," Rodriguez shouted over the noise of the helicopter rotors. "The hoist will lift both of us up to the aircraft. Stay calm and follow my instructions exactly." At 3:31 p.m., Ethan Blake was lifted off Terror Bay Peninsula, marking the end of his 12-hour nightmare, but the beginning of a massive search and recovery operation. As the helicopter climbed away from the beach, he could see the forest where his two friends had died, and for a moment he thought he saw a massive dark shape moving among the trees. The Coast Guard helicopter's departure triggered the full-scale emergency response that had been building since Ethan's initial distress call. Alaska State Troopers, Alaska Department of Fish and Game, local search and rescue volunteers, and federal agencies were all mobilizing resources for what would become one of the largest search and recovery operations in Kodiak Island history. Sergeant Lisa Campbell of the Alaska State Troopers was designated as the incident commander for the ground search operation. Campbell, a 15-year veteran with extensive experience in wilderness search and rescue, understood that recovering the bodies of Connor and Jason would require extreme caution given the presence of an aggressive bear. "We have 2 confirmed fatalities and an extremely dangerous animal in the area," Campbell briefed her assembled team at the Emergency Operations Center in Kodiak. "Our primary mission is body recovery, but we will not take unnecessary risks. All search teams will be armed and will include at least 1 member with bear experience." Sarah Chen, the wildlife biologist who had been trying to warn authorities about unusual bear behavior in the Terror Bay area, was brought in as a technical advisor for the operation. Her knowledge of the specific animal involved and its territory would be crucial for planning safe search strategies. Based on the survivor's description and previous reports from the area, we're dealing with an adult male brown bear of exceptional size, Chen explained to the search teams. "This animal has demonstrated hunting behavior toward humans and should be considered extremely dangerous. traditional bear deterrents may not be effective. The search and recovery operation would ultimately involve more than 50 personnel, including Alaska State Troopers, Alaska Department of Fish and Game officers, Coast Guard personnel, local search and rescue volunteers, and specialized teams trained in dangerous wildlife encounters. Weather conditions remained favorable for helicopter operations, allowing multiple aircraft to participate in the search effort. In addition to Coast Guard helicopters, Alaska State Troopers deployed their own helicopter equipped with FLIR thermal imaging equipment to locate the victims and track the bear's movements. At 4:15 p.m., thermal imaging detected what appeared to be a large heat signature in the forest interior, approximately 2 miles from the beach where Ethan had been rescued. The signature was consistent with an adult brown bear, and its location matched the area where the attacks had occurred. Search teams were landed at multiple locations around the peninsula's perimeter, creating a loose containment area while minimizing the risk of ground personnel encountering the aggressive bear. Each team was equipped with high-powered rifles, bear spray, and emergency communication equipment. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, Chief of Emergency Medicine at Kodiak Area Native Association Medical Center, had prepared the facility to receive the helicopter carrying Ethan. While he had reported no physical injuries, the possibility of delayed shock, hypothermia, or injuries that he might not have noticed during his escape required immediate medical evaluation. "Mr. Blake, I'm Dr. Walsh," she greeted him as he was brought into the emergency department. "We need to check you for injuries and make sure you're medically stable before we discuss what happened out there." Ethan's physical examination revealed multiple cuts and bruises from his flight through the forest, mild dehydration, and early signs of psychological shock, but no serious injuries. His core body temperature was slightly below normal due to his time in the Cold Creek water, but he was not hypothermic. The psychological impact of the day's events was evident in Ethan's demeanor: hypervigilance, difficulty concentrating, and a tremor in his hands that became more pronounced when he discussed the bear attack. Dr. Walsh prescribed mild sedation to help him rest while law enforcement conducted their initial interviews. Detective Robert Sterling of the Alaska State Troopers was assigned to conduct the preliminary investigation into the incident. Sterling, a 20-year veteran with extensive experience in outdoor recreational fatalities, understood that the survivor's account would be crucial for both the search operation and any potential legal proceedings. "Mr. Blake, I know this has been traumatic for you, but I need to get as much detail as possible about what happened," Sterling explained as he set up his recording equipment in the hospital room. "Your information will help us locate your friends and deal with the bear safely." Ethan provided a detailed account of the day's events, from their departure from Kodiak Harbor to his rescue from the beach. His description of the bear's size, behavior, and apparent intelligence corroborated the warnings that Thomas Kanatak and Sarah Chen had been trying to communicate to authorities. "This bear behaved unlike any animal I've ever encountered," Ethan told Detective Sterling. "It seemed to understand that we were carrying weapons, and it deliberately approached from a position that minimized our ability to escape. When we shot it multiple times with high-powered rifles, it showed no effect from wounds that should have stopped any animal." Sterling's investigation would ultimately determine that the incident represented a predatory attack by an exceptional individual bear, rather than a defensive encounter typical of most human-bear conflicts. This determination would have significant implications for how authorities dealt with the animal and future safety recommendations for the area. Meanwhile, the search for Connor and Jason's bodies continued through the afternoon and into the evening. Ground teams equipped with thermal imaging and scent detection dogs worked their way through the dense forest, while helicopter crews provided aerial coordination and emergency extraction capability. At 6:30 p.m., search dogs alerted to human scent in the area of the large spruce tree where Connor had attempted to climb to safety. Ground teams approached the location with extreme caution, armed and ready for potential bear encounter. Search team leader Captain Mike Thompson, Alaska Department of Fish and Game, made the discovery that confirmed everyone's worst fears. Connor's body was found at the base of the spruce tree, while evidence in the surrounding area indicated that a struggle had taken place involving an animal of extraordinary size and power. "We have located the first victim," Thompson reported over his radio. "Scene indicates bear attack, requesting crime scene technicians and body recovery team." The recovery of Connor's body required careful documentation of the scene while maintaining security against potential bear encounter. Crime scene technicians photographed the area extensively, documenting evidence that would later be used to reconstruct the attack and understand the bear's behavior patterns. Jason's body was discovered approximately 40 minutes later, roughly 100 yards from the meadow where the initial encounter had taken place. The condition of both victims confirmed the extraordinary violence of the attacks and the massive size and strength of the animal responsible. Dr. Catherine Morrison, the state medical examiner, would later determine that both victims had died from massive trauma consistent with brown bear attack. The extent of the injuries indicated an animal of exceptional size, and the pattern of wounds suggested that the bear had demonstrated unusual persistence and aggression. As darkness fell over Terror Bay Peninsula, the search teams were withdrawn to safe positions while thermal imaging helicopters continued to monitor for bear activity. The animal responsible for the attacks had not been located, and its continued presence in the area posed an ongoing threat to search personnel. The incident had already attracted media attention, with reporters from Anchorage and Seattle requesting interviews with survivors and officials. The story of 3 hunters attacked by a massive bear on a remote Alaskan peninsula represented exactly the kind of wilderness horror story that captured public imagination. Tom Bradley, news director for KTUU-TV in Anchorage, dispatched a crew to Kodiak to cover the story. The attack represented the worst bear-related fatality incident in Alaska in over a decade, and the unusual circumstances made it particularly newsworthy. "We have 2 confirmed fatalities in what appears to be a predatory attack by an exceptionally large brown bear," Bradley reported during the station's evening news broadcast. The survivor describes an animal that appeared to be hunting humans deliberately, behavior that wildlife experts say is extremely unusual for brown bears. The media coverage would ultimately bring national attention to the incident, with news crews from major networks traveling to Alaska to cover the story. The remote location and dramatic circumstances made it perfect for television coverage, while the questions raised about bear behavior and wilderness safety resonated with a broader audience. Dr. Patricia Williams, a wildlife behavior specialist at the University of Alaska Fairbanks, was contacted by multiple media outlets for expert commentary on the incident. Williams had studied aggressive bear behavior for over 20 years, and understood that predatory attacks represented the most dangerous type of human-bear encounter. "What the survivor describes sounds like a predatory attack, which is extremely rare, but also extremely dangerous," Williams explained to reporters. "Most bear attacks are defensive in nature, where the bear feels threatened or surprised. Predatory attacks involve a bear that has identified humans as prey, and these animals typically must be destroyed to prevent future incidents." The question of what to do about Takuka became a major point of controversy as news of the attack spread. Wildlife protection advocates argued that the bear was simply acting according to its natural behavior and should be relocated rather than killed. Hunting advocates and local residents demanded that the animal be destroyed to prevent future attacks. Sarah Chen found herself at the center of this controversy, as her previous warnings about the bear's unusual behavior were now being scrutinized by media and officials. Her recommendation that the area be closed to hunting had been ignored due to bureaucratic delays, and 2 men were now dead. I tried to warn people that this bear was exhibiting predatory behavior toward humans, Chen told reporters during a press conference on November 5th. The traditional knowledge holders in the community had been reporting unusual activity for months, but the system failed to respond quickly enough to prevent this tragedy. Thomas Kanatak, the Alutiiq elder who had been trying to warn authorities about Takuka, felt vindicated but also deeply saddened by the tragedy. His people had coexisted with brown bears for thousands of years, and they understood that certain individual animals became too dangerous to tolerate. "Our ancestors knew that some bears become killers," Thomas explained to a gathering of tribal elders convened to discuss the incident. "These bears must be stopped before they kill again. The old ways taught us to respect the bears, but also to protect our people from the ones that hunt us." The tribal council voted unanimously to support efforts to locate and destroy the bear responsible for the attacks. Their resolution carried significant weight with state authorities, as Alaska Native tribes possessed treaty rights regarding subsistence hunting and wildlife management on traditional lands. On November 6th, Alaska Department of Fish and Game announced that they would mount a specialized hunting operation to locate and destroy the bear responsible for the attacks. The operation would involve experienced bear hunters, wildlife biologists and law enforcement personnel working together to track down an animal that had proven extremely dangerous. Game Warden Lieutenant Colonel James Morrison was placed in command of the bear hunting operation. Morrison, a 30-year veteran with extensive experience in dangerous wildlife encounters, understood that hunting an aggressive bear in dense forest terrain would be extremely hazardous for his personnel. "We are dealing with an animal that has demonstrated intelligence, aggression, and hunting behavior toward humans," Morrison briefed his hunting teams. "This bear must be considered extremely dangerous, and we will not take any unnecessary risks in our efforts to locate and destroy it." The hunting operation would ultimately involve teams of 2 hunters each, armed with large-caliber rifles and accompanied by tracking dogs trained for bear hunting. Helicopter support would provide aerial reconnaissance and emergency extraction capability. Weather conditions remained favorable for the operation, with clear skies and light winds providing good visibility for both ground teams and aircraft. However, the dense forest terrain of Terror Bay Peninsula would limit the effectiveness of aerial surveillance and require the hunting teams to work in extremely dangerous conditions. At 8 a.m. on November 7th, the first hunting teams were inserted by helicopter at various locations around the peninsula. Each team carried high-powered rifles, emergency communication equipment, and bear spray as backup protection. The teams were instructed to maintain radio contact every 15 minutes and to immediately retreat if they encountered the bear without clear shooting opportunities. Tracker dogs immediately picked up bear scent in the area where the attacks had occurred, confirming that Takuka was still in the vicinity. The scent trail led deeper into the peninsula's interior, toward terrain that would be even more difficult for the hunting teams to navigate safely. Team Alpha, consisting of Game Wardens Daniel Creek and Susan Martinez, followed the scent trail toward a series of ridges that offered good defensive positions for a bear being pursued. Both wardens were experienced in bear hunting and carried .375H and H Magnum rifles loaded with solid bullets designed for deep penetration on large, dangerous game. "Track is fresh, maybe 6 to 8 hours old," Creek reported over his radio as he examined sign along a game trail. "Bear is moving toward higher ground, probably looking for defensible terrain." Team Bravo, consisting of Alaska State Trooper Corporal Mike Wilson and local hunting guide Randy Johnson, was working a parallel drainage approximately 1 mile south of Team Alpha's position. Johnson had been hunting bears on Kodiak Island for over 20 years and possessed an intimate knowledge of bear behavior and terrain. "We've got multiple tracks here, including some that match the size description from the survivor," Johnson reported. "This bear is definitely still in the area, and he's been active recently." The third team, consisting of Game Wardens Lisa Park and Tom Anderson, was following a ridgeline that would allow them to observe multiple drainage systems while maintaining good escape routes. Their position provided the best vantage point for spotting the bear at distance, but it also exposed them to potential ambush from the dense vegetation below. At 10:45 a.m., Team Alpha's tracking dogs suddenly became agitated, indicating that they had encountered very fresh bear scent. Creek and Martinez immediately went to high alert, scanning the surrounding forest for any sign of movement. "Dogs are indicating fresh scent. Very recent," Creek whispered into his radio. "We're going to proceed with extreme caution." The forest around Team Alpha was typical of Kodiak Island's interior, dense stands of Sitka spruce interspersed with thick underbrush that reduced visibility to mere yards in some areas. The terrain provided perfect cover for a bear to approach undetected, and both wardens understood that they might have only seconds to react if Takuka decided to attack. Martinez positioned herself to provide overwatch, while Creek followed the dogs along the scent trail. Their plan was to maintain visual contact with each other, while advancing slowly enough to react to any sudden bear appearance. At 11:03 a.m., the dogs suddenly stopped and began backing away from the trail ahead, their behavior indicating that they had detected something that alarmed them. Creek immediately signaled for Martinez to join him, and both wardens prepared for potential bear encounter. "Dogs are spooked," Creek reported over his radio. "Something ahead has them scared. We're going to advance on foot and see what we can find." Takuka was approximately 50 yards ahead of the hunting team, concealed in a thicket of dense vegetation that provided perfect camouflage for his dark brown coat. The bear had been aware of the dogs and humans following his trail for the past hour, and he had chosen this location to make his stand. Unlike most bears, which would flee when pursued by armed humans, Takuka had learned to view humans as prey rather than threats. His experiences over the past several months had taught him that humans were relatively slow and vulnerable, and their weapons could be neutralized through rapid, aggressive attack. The bear's strategy was to allow the hunting team to approach within striking distance before launching an ambush attack that would eliminate the threat and provide him with additional food. His intelligence allowed him to plan this tactical response, rather than simply reacting to the immediate situation. Creek and Martinez advanced slowly along the game trail, their rifles ready and their attention focused on the dense vegetation ahead. The silence of the forest was broken only by the sound of their own movement and the occasional rustle of wind through the trees. At 11:07 a.m., Takuka launched his attack from the thicket, covering the distance to the hunting team in approximately 3 seconds. His massive size and surprising speed caught both wardens off guard, despite their preparation and training for exactly this scenario. Creek managed to fire one shot before the bear reached him, the .375 H and H Magnum bullet striking Takuka in the chest with tremendous force. However, the bear's massive muscle mass and thick hide absorbed the impact without significant effect, and his charge continued without interruption. Martinez attempted to bring her rifle to bear on the charging animal, but Takuka's speed made accurate shooting nearly impossible. Her shot went wide, striking a tree trunk behind the bear and sending splinters flying through the air. The attack on Team Alpha lasted approximately 2 minutes, during which radio communications were disrupted by the sounds of struggle and the failure of electronic equipment damaged during the encounter. Other hunting teams could hear the gunfire and sounds of conflict, but were too far away to provide immediate assistance. At 11:15 a.m., helicopter support was dispatched to Team Alpha's last known position to provide emergency assistance. The helicopter crew found evidence of a struggle, but no sign of either the hunting team or the bear. Blood evidence and damaged equipment indicated that a violent encounter had taken place. Team Alpha location shows signs of bear attack, the helicopter crew reported to Incident Command. No personnel visible, but we have blood evidence and damaged equipment. Requesting additional ground support and medical team. The loss of Team Alpha represented a catastrophic escalation of the situation. Takuka had now killed 5 people in less than a week, and his continued presence on the peninsula posed an ongoing threat to anyone who entered his territory. Incident Commander Morrison faced the difficult decision of whether to continue the hunting operation or withdraw all personnel until additional resources could be brought to bear. The bear had demonstrated an ability to ambush and kill experienced, well-armed hunting teams, suggesting that conventional hunting tactics might be insufficient. "We are dealing with an animal that represents an unprecedented threat," Morrison announced during an emergency briefing. "Normal hunting protocols have proven inadequate, and we need to reassess our approach before we lose any more personnel." The decision was made to withdraw all ground teams and rely on aerial reconnaissance to track the bear's movements. Military resources were requested to assist in the operation, including specialized personnel trained in hunting dangerous animals in hostile environments. Major General Patricia Collins, commander of the Alaska National Guard, authorized the deployment of specialized troops to assist in the bear hunting operation. The personnel selected for the mission included snipers trained in long-range precision shooting and special operations personnel experienced in tracking dangerous targets. This situation requires capabilities beyond those of normal wildlife management, General Collins explained to the assembled military personnel. "You are being asked to neutralize a threat that has already killed 5 people and has demonstrated tactical awareness and aggression beyond normal parameters." The military's involvement in the operation brought additional resources and capabilities, including advanced thermal imaging equipment, night vision devices, and high-powered rifles capable of stopping any animal on Earth. However, it also raised questions about the appropriate response to wildlife conflicts and the precedent being set for future incidents. Environmental protection groups criticized the decision to involve military personnel in hunting a bear, arguing that the animal was simply following its natural behavior and that humans had encroached on its territory. These groups advocated for capture and relocation rather than lethal action. Dr. Michael Robinson, director of the Center for Biological Diversity, issued a statement condemning the hunting operation. "This bear is acting according to its natural instincts in its own habitat. The appropriate response is to restrict human access to the area, not to mount a military operation against a wild animal." Local residents and hunting advocates strongly disagreed with the environmental groups, arguing that a bear that had killed 5 people represented an immediate threat to public safety that could not be addressed through relocation efforts. "You can't relocate a bear that has learned to hunt humans," argued Jim Patterson, president of the Kodiak Island Hunting Association. "This animal has crossed a line that makes it too dangerous to allow to live. The only appropriate response is to track it down and destroy it before it kills anyone else." The controversy over the appropriate response to Takuka reflected broader tensions about human-wildlife conflicts in Alaska, where development pressure and climate change were bringing humans and bears into contact more frequently. On November 8th, aerial reconnaissance using military-grade thermal imaging detected a large heat signature in the interior of Terror Bay Peninsula. The signature was consistent with an adult brown bear and was located in extremely dense forest terrain that would make ground approach nearly impossible. Captain Rebecca Thompson, a military sniper with extensive experience in long-range shooting, was selected to attempt a precision shot from a helicopter hovering at maximum safe distance. Thompson's rifle, a .50 caliber Barrett M82 with specialized bear hunting ammunition, was capable of delivering lethal force at ranges exceeding 1,000 yards. Target is located in dense forest at approximately 800 yards from our hover position, Thompson reported as she prepared for the shot. Thermal imaging shows the target is stationary, probably resting. I have a clear thermal signature but limited visual confirmation through the forest canopy. The shot was taken at 2:30 p.m. on November 8th, with the helicopter maintaining a stable hover position while Thompson fired a single .50 caliber bullet at the thermal signature detected in the forest below. The bullet's impact was confirmed by thermal imaging, which showed the target's heat signature disappearing immediately after the shot. Ground teams were inserted by helicopter to confirm the kill and recover any remains. The teams found a large brown bear that had been killed instantly by Thompson's precision shot, but questions immediately arose about whether this was actually the bear responsible for the attacks. We have a large, adult male brown bear, probably around 900 pounds, reported the ground team leader. However, this animal doesn't match the size description provided by the survivor of the original attack. Measurements and photographs of the dead bear confirmed that while it was a large adult male, it was significantly smaller than the animal described by Ethan Blake and the evidence found at the attack scenes. The dead bear's paws measured only 8 inches long compared to the 12-inch tracks found at Terror Bay Peninsula. Dr. Sarah Chen, who examined the dead bear, concluded that it was not the animal responsible for the attacks. "This is definitely not the bear we're looking for," she announced at a press briefing. "The size doesn't match, and there's no evidence on this animal of recent injuries from gunshots." The realization that they had killed the wrong bear meant that Takuka was still alive and still posed a threat to anyone who entered his territory. The hunting operation had cost the lives of 2 experienced game wardens and had failed to eliminate the target animal. "We are back to square one," admitted Incident Commander Morrison. "The bear responsible for these attacks is still out there, and we need to completely rethink our approach to locating and destroying this animal." Weather conditions began to deteriorate on November 9th, with a major storm system approaching from the Gulf of Alaska. High winds and heavy precipitation would make helicopter operations impossible and would provide the bear with additional cover from aerial surveillance. The storm system forced a temporary suspension of hunting operations, giving Takuka several days to move to new territory or potentially leave Terror Bay Peninsula entirely. The delay represented a significant setback for the operation and increased the likelihood that the bear might encounter other humans before he could be located. Local residents were warned to avoid the Terror Bay Peninsula area and to exercise extreme caution when traveling in any remote areas of Kodiak Island. The warning represented the first time in modern history that a single bear had effectively closed off a large area of public land due to safety concerns. Until this animal is located and destroyed, we are recommending that all recreational activities in the Terror Bay Peninsula area be suspended, announced Alaska Department of Fish and Game Director James Wilson. This bear has demonstrated predatory behavior toward humans and should be considered extremely dangerous. The suspension of recreational activities in the area had significant economic impacts for local outfitters and guides who depended on hunting and fishing tourism for their livelihoods. Several charter operations were forced to cancel bookings and redirect clients to other areas of the island. Captain Steve Morrison, owner of Kodiak Wilderness Adventures, estimated that the bear incident would cost his business over $50,000 in lost revenue during the peak fall hunting season. This one bear has effectively shut down an entire area of the island, Morrison complained. The longer it takes to deal with this situation, the more damage it does to our local economy. The economic impact extended beyond tourism to affect subsistence hunters and fishermen who relied on Terror Bay Peninsula for traditional food gathering. Alaska Native communities that had used the area for generations were now forced to seek alternative locations for hunting and fishing activities. Thomas Kanatak expressed frustration with the ongoing situation during a tribal council meeting on November 10th. "Our people have been hunting in that area for thousands of years," he said. "Now one bear has made it too dangerous for us to continue our traditional practices. This is why the old ways taught us to deal with problem bears immediately." But the storm system that had suspended hunting operations finally moved through the area on November 12th, leaving behind clear skies and improved visibility for aerial reconnaissance. However, thermal imaging flights detected no sign of bear activity in the areas where Takuka had previously been located. The target animal appears to have moved from his previous territory, reported helicopter pilot Chief Warrant Officer Maria Santos. "We've conducted extensive thermal scanning of the entire peninsula, and we're not finding any heat signatures consistent with a large bear." The possibility that Takuka had left Terror Bay Peninsula raised new concerns about public safety throughout the Kodiak Island region. If the bear was mobile and seeking new territory, he could potentially encounter humans anywhere on the island. Alaska State Troopers issued a territory-wide alert warning residents and visitors about the potential presence of an extremely dangerous bear. The alert included detailed descriptions of the animal's size and behavior patterns, along with emergency procedures for anyone who might encounter him. "We are dealing with a bear that has learned to hunt humans and has demonstrated exceptional size and aggression," the alert warned. "Anyone who encounters this animal should not attempt to scare it away or retreat slowly. Immediately seek shelter in a vehicle or building and contact emergency services." The alert represented an unprecedented response to a wildlife threat in Alaska, where bear encounters were common but rarely resulted in territory-wide warnings. The unusual nature of Takuka's behavior and his proven ability to kill armed, experienced hunters made him a unique threat, requiring extraordinary precautions. Local schools implemented new safety protocols requiring students to remain indoors during recess and prohibiting outdoor activities until the bear threat was resolved. The protocols represented a significant disruption to normal educational activities and highlighted the extent to which one animal had affected an entire community. Jennifer Morrison, principal of Kodiak Elementary School, explained the decision to implement the protocols. "We cannot take any risks with our children's safety. Until this bear is captured or killed, we will maintain heightened security measures and limit outdoor exposure." The impact on children's activities extended beyond schools to affect youth hunting and fishing programs that were important parts of local culture. Organizations like the Boy Scouts and local 4-H clubs suspended all outdoor activities indefinitely, depriving young people of traditional learning opportunities. Dr. Patricia Williams, the wildlife behavior specialist, was contacted by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention to provide expert analysis of the incident for potential inclusion in national safety guidelines. The CDC was concerned that Takuka's behavior might indicate a new pattern of human-bear conflict that could occur elsewhere. "What we're seeing in this case appears to be an individual bear that has learned to view humans as prey," Williams explained to CDC officials. This represents a significant departure from normal brown bear behavior and could potentially occur with other individual animals under similar circumstances. The CDC's interest in the incident reflected growing concerns about wildlife-human conflicts in areas where development pressure and climate change were altering traditional wildlife behavior patterns. Takuka's case might represent an early example of adaptation that could become more common in the future. On November 15th, a commercial fishing vessel reported a possible bear sighting on a small island approximately 10 miles southeast of Terror Bay Peninsula. The crew of the fishing vessel Ocean Harvest described seeing a large brown bear swimming between islands, behavior that was unusual but not unprecedented for Kodiak brown bears. "We saw this massive bear swimming from one island to another," reported Captain David Lee of the Ocean Harvest. "I've been fishing these waters for 20 years, and I've never seen a bear that size. It had to be at least 1,000 pounds, maybe more." The sighting was investigated by Coast Guard helicopters, but no bear was found on the island where the animal had supposedly come ashore. However, fresh tracks in the sand confirmed that a large bear had indeed been in the area recently. The discovery that Takuka could swim between islands significantly complicated the search operation. Instead of being confined to Terror Bay Peninsula, the bear now had access to dozens of islands throughout the Kodiak archipelago, making it nearly impossible to predict where he might appear next. "We are now dealing with a mobile threat that could potentially appear anywhere in the region," admitted Incident Commander Morrison. "Our search area has expanded from a single peninsula to an entire archipelago, which makes locating this animal exponentially more difficult. The expanded search area required additional resources and personnel, straining the capabilities of state and federal agencies already committed to the operation. Military assistance was requested to provide additional helicopters and surveillance equipment for the expanded search effort. Weather conditions remained favorable for search operations, with clear skies and calm winds, providing good visibility for aerial reconnaissance. However, the vast area that now needed to be searched made systematic coverage nearly impossible with available resources. On November 18th, a deer hunting party on Whale Island, approximately 20 miles from Terror Bay Peninsula, discovered what appeared to be a large bear cache containing the remains of several deer. The cache was significantly larger than normal bear food storage sites and contained evidence of consumption patterns consistent with an exceptionally large animal. Game Warden Susan Martinez, one of the few wildlife officials with personal experience in tracking large bears, was brought in to examine the cache site. Martinez had survived a brown bear attack earlier in her career and possessed expertise in reading bear sign and behavior. "This cache shows signs of an animal much larger than normal," Martinez reported after examining the site. "The way the prey was killed and stored indicates a bear with exceptional strength and hunting ability. This could be our target animal." Fresh tracks around the cache site confirmed the presence of a large bear, but the tracks were several days old and showed that the animal had already moved on from the area. However, the discovery provided valuable intelligence about Takuka's current hunting patterns and territory. "The bear is definitely mobile and hunting actively," Martinez explained to search teams. "The pattern of kills and caches suggests he's moved his territory to include several islands in this area. We need to focus our search on areas with good deer populations where he's likely to establish new hunting grounds." The discovery on Whale Island prompted increased surveillance of other islands in the archipelago, particularly those with known deer populations and limited human activity. Trail cameras were deployed at likely locations, and aerial reconnaissance was intensified. Local residents throughout the Kodiak archipelago were advised to report any unusual bear activity or signs of large bear presence. The reporting system was designed to help authorities track Takuka's movements and predict where he might appear next. Mary Johnson, a resident of Uzinki on Spruce Island, reported seeing tracks on a beach near her home that matched the size description of the target bear. "These tracks were bigger than anything I've ever seen," Johnson told authorities. "My husband has been hunting bears for 30 years, and he said he's never seen tracks that large." The reported sighting on Spruce Island was investigated by search teams, but no recent bear sign was found in the area. However, the report demonstrated that local residents were taking the threat seriously and were actively monitoring for bear activity. On November 22nd, exactly 18 days after the original attack, a chartered float plane carrying photographers to document wildlife reported a close encounter with an extremely large brown bear on a remote beach on Sitka Island. Pilot Jerry Martinez was dropping off his passengers when he noticed movement in the tree line near the beach. "I saw this massive bear come out of the forest and start walking toward the plane," Martinez reported. "I've seen a lot of bears in my 20 years of flying, but this one was different. It didn't show any fear of the aircraft, and it was bigger than any bear I've ever seen." The photographers, who were equipped with telephoto lenses, managed to capture several images of the bear before Martinez made the decision to take off immediately. The photographs would later be analyzed by wildlife experts and compared to evidence from the Terror Bay Peninsula attacks. Dr. Sarah Chen examined the photographs and concluded that they showed an animal consistent with the bear responsible for the attacks. "The size, coloration, and body conformation match what we would expect from the animal described by the survivor," Chen announced. These photographs represent the first confirmed sighting of the target bear since the hunting operation began. The photographs showed Takuka standing on the beach in full profile, allowing accurate size estimates based on comparison with known objects in the frame. The bear's massive head and thick neck confirmed that he was an exceptional individual, even by Kodiak Island standards. "Based on these photographs, we can estimate that this bear weighs between 1,200 and 1,400 pounds, Chen explained to incident commanders. That places him in the top 1% of brown bears ever documented and helps explain his ability to survive multiple rifle shots during the original attack. The confirmed sighting on Sitka Island prompted an immediate response from search teams, including helicopter insertion of tracking specialists and deployment of additional trail cameras throughout the area. However, by the time teams reached the location, Takuka had once again disappeared into the dense forest. Tracking dogs brought to Sitka Island detected fresh bear scent, but were unable to follow a clear trail through the rocky, mountainous terrain that characterized the island's interior. The challenging terrain provided perfect cover for a bear seeking to avoid human contact. "The scent trail leads into some of the most difficult terrain in the archipelago," reported Master Tracker William Thompson. "Following this bear into that country would be extremely dangerous for our personnel, and we have no guarantee that we could corner him even if we could track him." The decision was made to establish observation posts around Sitka Island rather than pursue Takuka into the interior. The observation posts were equipped with thermal imaging equipment and high-powered rifles, designed to detect and eliminate the bear if he emerged from the forest. However, Takuka's intelligence and experience with human pursuit meant that he was unlikely to expose himself to the kind of long-range shooting that had been planned. The bear had already demonstrated his ability to avoid detection and to strike when conditions were most favorable to him. Weather conditions began to deteriorate again on November 25th, with another major storm system approaching from the Gulf of Alaska. The storm would bring high winds, heavy precipitation, and rough seas that would make helicopter operations impossible and would provide Takuka with additional cover. The approaching storm forced the withdrawal of search teams from Sitka Island and the suspension of aerial surveillance operations. Once again, Takuka would have several days of freedom from human pursuit, during which he could move to new territory or potentially encounter other humans. Local residents were warned about the increased danger during the storm period, when emergency response capabilities would be limited and Takuka's movements would be difficult to track. The warning advised people to remain indoors and to avoid any outdoor activities that might bring them into contact with the bear. The storm system that struck the Kodiak archipelago on November 26th was one of the most severe of the season, with sustained winds exceeding 60 miles per hour and gusts reaching nearly 90 miles per hour. The storm effectively grounded all aircraft and made boat travel extremely dangerous. During the 3-day storm period, authorities lost all ability to monitor Takuka's movements or respond to potential bear encounters. The communication blackout represented the most dangerous period of the entire incident, when the bear was completely free to move and hunt without detection. On November 29th, as the storm began to clear, a disturbing discovery was made on Raspberry Island, approximately 40 miles from the last confirmed sighting. A family of subsistence hunters had been found dead at their remote cabin, apparently killed by a large bear that had broken into their shelter. The Petrov family, Alexander, Maria, and their teenage son Nicholas, had been spending the Thanksgiving holiday at their traditional hunting cabin when they were attacked. The condition of their bodies and the extensive damage to their cabin confirmed that they had been killed by an animal of exceptional size and strength. Alaska State Troopers, Sergeant Lisa Campbell, led the investigation team that examined the Petrov family cabin. The scene showed evidence of a methodical attack by a bear that had broken through reinforced doors and walls to reach the family inside. This wasn't a random encounter, Campbell reported. The bear deliberately broke into an occupied building and hunted down the people inside. This represents a level of aggressive behavior that we've never documented before. The attack on the Petrov family brought the total death toll to 8 people killed by Takuka in less than 4 weeks. The escalating violence demonstrated that the bear was becoming increasingly aggressive and that his hunting territory was expanding throughout the archipelago. DNA evidence collected at the Petrov cabin confirmed that the same bear responsible for the Terror Bay Peninsula attacks had killed the family. The evidence also showed that Takuka had spent considerable time at the cabin after the attack, suggesting that he was using the location as a temporary base. The DNA evidence conclusively links this attack to the same animal responsible for the previous incidents, announced Alaska Department of Fish and Game Director James Wilson. We are dealing with a serial killer that happens to be a bear, and we must respond accordingly. The attack on an isolated family in their own cabin represented an escalation in Takuka's behavior that alarmed wildlife experts. Bears that broke into occupied buildings to attack humans had crossed a behavioral line that made them unsuitable for capture and relocation. This bear has become a man-eater in the truest sense, explained Dr. Patricia Williams. Animals that actively hunt humans in their shelters cannot be rehabilitated or relocated. The only appropriate response is immediate destruction of the animal. The Petrov family's death prompted renewed calls for military intervention in the bear hunting operation. Local residents argued that conventional wildlife management techniques had proven inadequate and that more aggressive measures were needed to protect public safety. Governor Michael Davidson announced on November 30th that he was authorizing the use of any and all necessary resources to locate and destroy the bear responsible for the attacks. The authorization included potential use of military helicopters, specialized hunting teams, and even explosives if necessary. 8 people are dead because of this animal, Governor Davidson announced during a press conference. We will use whatever resources are necessary to ensure that no one else dies. This bear will be hunted down and destroyed, regardless of cost or controversy. The governor's authorization brought additional federal resources into the operation, including specialized military units trained in tracking dangerous targets. The expanded operation would involve coordination between multiple agencies and would represent one of the largest manhunts in Alaska history. Special Operations Command deployed a team of specialists experienced in tracking dangerous targets in hostile environments. The team included snipers, trackers, and survival experts trained to operate in the kind of terrain where Takuka had been evading capture. Master Sergeant Robert Chen, team leader for the Special Operations Unit, briefed his personnel on the unique challenges of hunting an intelligent, aggressive bear in dense forest terrain. This target has already killed 8 people, including experienced hunters and wildlife officers, Chen explained. We are dealing with an animal that has learned to hunt humans and has demonstrated tactical awareness beyond normal parameters. The Special Operations Team brought capabilities that civilian hunters and wildlife officers lacked, including advanced thermal imaging equipment, night vision devices, and communication systems that would allow coordination with helicopter support in real time. On December 3rd, the team was inserted by helicopter onto Raspberry Island to begin tracking from the location of the most recent attack. The Petrov family cabin had been preserved as a crime scene, but the team was allowed to examine the site for intelligence about Takuka's behavior and movements. The target spent considerable time at this location after the attack, reported Master Sergeant Chen. He appears to have used the cabin as a shelter and may have remained in the area for several days. This suggests he's established a new territory in this region. Fresh tracks around the cabin confirmed that Takuka was still in the area. Though the tracks were several days old, the team's tracking dogs detected strong bear scent but were unable to determine the direction of travel due to the age of the trail. The team established a base camp on Raspberry Island and began systematic searches of areas where the bear was most likely to be hiding. The island's rugged terrain provided numerous locations where a large bear could remain concealed from aerial surveillance. Weather conditions remained favorable for the operation, with clear skies and light winds providing good visibility for both ground searches and helicopter support. However, the approaching winter conditions meant that time was running out before seasonal weather would make operations impossible. On December 6th, the tracking dogs detected fresh scent along a salmon stream in the island's interior. The scent was less than 12 hours old, indicating that Takuka was still actively using the area for hunting and foraging. "We have fresh sign," Master Sergeant Chen reported over his radio. "Dogs are indicating recent bear activity in this drainage. We're going to advance carefully and see if we can locate the target." The team moved through the dense forest with extreme caution, using advanced communication systems to maintain contact with helicopter support. Each team member was equipped with high-powered rifles and emergency signaling devices that would automatically transmit their location if activated. At 2:15 p.m. on December 6th, thermal imaging detected a large heat signature, approximately 400 yards ahead of the search team. The signature was consistent with a large bear and was located in dense vegetation that would provide perfect cover for an ambush attack. "We have thermal contact," Chen reported. "Large heat signature in thick cover, approximately 400 meters ahead of our position. Requesting helicopter support for overwatch." The helicopter crew confirmed visual contact with the thermal signature and reported that the target appeared to be a very large brown bear resting in dense underbrush. However, the vegetation was too thick to provide a clear shot from the air. Chen made the decision to approach the target on foot, using the team's advanced equipment to maintain communication with helicopter support while moving through the dangerous terrain. The plan was to get close enough for a clear shot while maintaining multiple escape routes. As the team moved closer to the thermal signature, their equipment detected movement in the target area. The bear appeared to be shifting position, possibly preparing to move to a new location or responding to the approaching humans. At 2:31 p.m., Takuka emerged from the dense vegetation approximately 200 yards ahead of the search team. Even at that distance, the bear's massive size was immediately apparent, confirming that they had finally located the animal responsible for 8 deaths. Visual contact with target, Chen reported. Extremely large brown bear, matches description from previous incidents, preparing to engage. Takuka's behavior upon detecting the human presence was unlike that of any bear the team members had ever encountered. Instead of fleeing or displaying defensive postures, the bear turned to face them directly and began moving toward their position with the purposeful stride of a predator approaching prey. "Target is advancing toward our position," Chen reported with controlled urgency. "This is not normal defensive behavior." Target appears to be mounting an attack. The team's sniper, Sergeant First Class Maria Santos, had positioned herself with a clear line of sight to the bear's location. Her rifle, a .50 caliber Barrett M82, loaded with armor-piercing ammunition, was capable of stopping any animal on Earth. "I have a clear shot," Santos reported. "Target is at 180 meters and closing, requesting permission to engage." "Take the shot," Chen ordered. Santos fired at 2:33 p.m., the massive .50 caliber bullet striking Takuka center mass with devastating force. The impact was clearly visible through the team's scopes, and the bear staggered from the tremendous energy transfer of the bullet. However, instead of dropping immediately as expected, Takuka recovered his balance and continued his advance toward the team's position. The wound, that should have been instantly fatal, appeared to have little effect on his aggressive behavior. "Target is hit, but still advancing," Santos reported with disbelief. "Reloading for follow-up shot." Chen ordered his team to fall back to predetermined positions while Santos attempted a second shot. The bear's ability to absorb a .50 caliber bullet and continue attacking exceeded anything in their training or experience. Santos's second shot struck Takuka in the head, the massive bullet impacting with enough force to drop any creature on Earth. This time, the bear finally collapsed, his massive body falling motionless to the forest floor. "Target is down," Santos reported. "Confirmed kill with second shot." The team approached Takuka's body with extreme caution, maintaining their weapons ready in case the massive animal was still alive. However, examination confirmed that the bear was dead, finally ending the month-long manhunt that had terrorized the Kodiak archipelago. Measurements of Takuka's body confirmed the exceptional nature of the animal that had killed 8 people. The bear measured 9 feet 4 inches from nose to tail and stood nearly 5 feet tall at the shoulder. His estimated weight of 1,347 pounds placed him among the largest brown bears ever documented. "This is truly an exceptional animal," reported Dr. Sarah Chen, who was brought to the site to examine the body. "Bears of this size and apparent intelligence are extremely rare, and his aggressive behavior toward humans was completely outside normal parameters." The examination also revealed that Takuka had indeed been wounded during the original attack at Terror Bay Peninsula. Healed bullet wounds in his chest and shoulder showed that he had survived being shot multiple times with high-powered hunting rifles, an injury tolerance that explained his ability to continue attacking after being wounded. "This bear survived wounds that would have killed most animals," Chen explained. "His exceptional size and physical condition allowed him to absorb damage that would stop a normal bear, which explains why the hunter's rifles were ineffective during the original attack." DNA analysis of tissue samples confirmed that this was indeed the animal responsible for all 8 deaths. The samples matched evidence collected at each attack site, conclusively proving that a single bear had been responsible for the entire series of killings. The death of Takuka marked the end of one of the most extensive and dangerous wildlife control operations in Alaska history. The operation had involved hundreds of personnel, multiple agencies, and costs exceeding $2 million, demonstrating the extreme measures required to deal with a bear that had learned to hunt humans. News of Takuka's death was met with relief throughout the Kodiak archipelago, where residents had been living under the constant threat of bear attack for over a month. Schools resumed normal outdoor activities, and recreational areas were reopened to public access. "We can finally return to normal life," announced Mayor Jennifer Thompson of Kodiak. "This bear had terrorized our entire community, and we're grateful to all the law enforcement and military personnel who worked to protect our residents." The incident prompted a comprehensive review of Alaska's wildlife management policies and emergency response procedures. The month-long delay in eliminating the threat had allowed Takuka to kill 8 people, raising questions about whether earlier action could have prevented some of the deaths. Dr. Patricia Williams was appointed to lead a state commission reviewing the incident and developing recommendations for dealing with similar situations in the future. The commission's work would focus on early warning systems, rapid response protocols, and improved coordination between agencies. "We need to learn from this tragedy to prevent similar incidents in the future," Williams explained. "While bears like Takuka are extremely rare, climate change and development pressure are bringing humans and bears into contact more frequently, and we need to be better prepared." NERLSA, the Commission's preliminary recommendations, included improved communication systems between traditional knowledge holders and wildlife managers, faster response times for unusual wildlife behavior reports, and enhanced training for personnel dealing with aggressive bears. Thomas Kanatak, the Alutiiq elder who had tried to warn authorities about Takuka's unusual behavior, was appointed to the commission to ensure that traditional knowledge was incorporated into future wildlife management decisions. Our ancestors knew how to deal with problem bears because they understood that some animals become too dangerous to tolerate, Kanatak explained. Modern management needs to combine traditional knowledge with scientific methods to identify dangerous animals before they kill people. The psychological impact of the incident extended far beyond the immediate victims to affect the entire Kodiak community. Many residents reported symptoms of anxiety and hypervigilance when venturing into outdoor areas, and local mental health professionals saw an increase in requests for counseling services. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, who had treated the original survivor Ethan Blake, organized community support groups to help residents cope with the trauma of living under the constant threat of bear attack. The support groups provided a forum for people to share their fears and develop coping strategies. "This incident affected everyone in our community," Dr. Walsh explained. "Even people who never personally encountered the bear were living with the knowledge that a predator was actively hunting humans in our area. That kind of psychological stress has long-term effects that we need to address." Ethan Blake, the sole survivor of the original attack, struggled with severe post-traumatic stress disorder and survivor's guilt. His detailed recollection of watching his friends die, combined with the knowledge that his warning had ultimately saved many lives, created a complex emotional burden. "I keep thinking about what I could have done differently," Blake told his counselor during one of his therapy sessions. "Maybe if we had been more prepared, or if we had turned back earlier, Connor and Jason would still be alive." Blake's psychological recovery was complicated by the media attention surrounding the incident. His story had attracted national coverage, and he was frequently contacted by reporters seeking interviews about his experience surviving the attack. The families of the victims struggled with their own grief and trauma while dealing with the intense media scrutiny that surrounded the case. The unusual circumstances of the attacks made them newsworthy, but the attention often interfered with the families' attempts to mourn and heal. Connor Hill's parents, David and Susan Hill, established a memorial fund to support bear safety education and research. The fund provided grants for equipment and training designed to help outdoor enthusiasts avoid dangerous bear encounters. Connor loved the wilderness, and he wouldn't want his death to discourage others from enjoying outdoor activities, his mother Susan explained during the fund's announcement, but he would want people to be prepared and educated about the risks they might face. Jason Ford's family chose to honor his memory by supporting traditional knowledge preservation efforts. Jason's Alutiiq heritage had been an important part of his identity, and his family wanted to ensure that traditional wisdom about wildlife behavior was not lost. Jason understood that his ancestors had lived with these animals for thousands of years, explained his grandmother Martha Ford. He would want us to preserve that knowledge so that future generations can live safely in bear country. The Petrov family's deaths had particularly affected the Alaska Native community as they represented the loss of important traditional knowledge holders. Alexander Petrov had been teaching young people traditional hunting and fishing skills, while Maria Petrov had been working to preserve traditional foods and preparation methods. The impact on the local economy gradually diminished as tourism and outdoor recreation returned to normal levels. However, the incident had permanent effects on how outdoor businesses operated, with increased emphasis on bear safety training and emergency preparedness. Captain Steve Morrison, the outfitter who had lost business during the bear crisis, implemented new safety protocols for all his guided trips. The protocols included enhanced bear deterrent equipment, improved communication systems, and additional training for guides. This incident taught us that we can never be too prepared when it comes to bear safety, Morrison explained. We've invested heavily in new equipment and training to ensure that our clients have the best possible protection. The scientific community continued to study Takuka's behavior patterns and physical characteristics to better understand how such an exceptional animal had developed. The bear's brain was preserved for study, and researchers hoped to identify physiological factors that might have contributed to his unusual intelligence and aggression. Dr. Sarah Chen's research team examined tissue samples from Takuka to look for genetic markers that might explain his exceptional size and behavior. The research was part of a broader effort to understand individual variation in bear behavior and to identify warning signs of problematic animals. Understanding what made this bear different from others could help us identify similar animals in the future, Chen explained. If we can develop early warning indicators for bears that might become dangerous to humans, we could prevent similar tragedies. The research findings were shared with wildlife managers throughout Alaska and other regions with large bear populations. The information was incorporated into training programs for wildlife officers and emergency responders who might encounter similar situations. 1 year after the incident, a memorial service was held at Terror Bay Peninsula to honor the victims and to mark the area's return to public access. The service included traditional Alutiiq ceremonies as well as modern memorial elements, reflecting the diverse community that had been affected by the tragedy. Ethan Blake attended the memorial service, his first return to the peninsula since his rescue. The visit was emotionally difficult, but represented an important step in his psychological recovery from the trauma of the attack. "I needed to come back here to honor Connor and Jason's memory," Blake explained to the gathered crowd. "They died doing something they loved, in a place they loved, and I want people to remember them as the good men they were, not just as victims of a bear attack." The memorial service also included the dedication of new safety equipment installed at the peninsula, including emergency communication beacons and bear-proof food storage facilities. The improvements were funded by donations from outdoor organizations and government agencies. Thomas Kanatak performed traditional ceremonies to honor the victims and to ask for protection for future visitors to the area. The ceremonies acknowledged the role that wildlife played in the traditional worldview, while also recognizing the need to protect human life. "We share this land with the bears, but we must also protect our people," Kanatak said during the ceremony. "The old ways taught us to respect the animals, but also to defend ourselves when necessary." The incident's impact on wildlife management policies extended beyond Alaska to influence bear management practices throughout North America. Other jurisdictions studied the response to Takuka and incorporated lessons learned into their own emergency protocols. The incident also contributed to ongoing debates about human-wildlife conflicts and the appropriate balance between conservation and public safety. Environmental groups and hunting organizations found common ground in supporting improved early warning systems and better coordination between agencies. This tragedy showed that we all have an interest in preventing dangerous wildlife situations before they become crises, explained Dr. Michael Robinson of the Center for Biological Diversity. "Whether you're a conservationist or a hunter, nobody wants to see people die or animals destroyed because of preventable conflicts." The commission studying the incident released its final report 18 months after Takuka's death. The report included 47 recommendations for improving wildlife management and emergency response procedures, most of which were adopted by state and federal agencies. Key recommendations included mandatory reporting systems for unusual wildlife behavior, rapid response teams for dangerous animal situations, enhanced training for wildlife officers, and improved coordination between traditional knowledge holders and scientific managers. The report also recommended increased funding for research into individual variation in wildlife behavior, particularly factors that might predict when animals would become dangerous to humans. This research would be supported by specimens and data collected during the Takuka incident. 5 years after the incident, Terror Bay Peninsula had returned to its status as a popular hunting and fishing destination. However, the area was now equipped with modern safety infrastructure and was patrolled more regularly by wildlife officers. New visitors to the area learned about the incident through interpretive displays that honored the victims while providing education about bear safety and wildlife behavior. The displays emphasized both the rarity of predatory bear attacks and the importance of proper preparation and caution. Ethan Blake eventually returned to guiding hunting trips, though he never again visited Terror Bay Peninsula. His experience had made him one of the most knowledgeable bear safety instructors in Alaska, and he frequently spoke to hunting groups about wilderness preparedness. "The wilderness is beautiful and life-changing, but it can also be dangerous," Blake would tell his audiences. "Connor and Jason died because we encountered an exceptional animal in exceptional circumstances, but their deaths taught us lessons that can help protect others." The legacy of the 8 people killed by Takuka lived on through improved safety practices, enhanced research, and stronger connections between traditional knowledge and modern wildlife management. Their deaths had not been in vain if they prevented similar tragedies in the future. The story of Takuka became part of Alaska's oral tradition, joining the traditional stories of other exceptional bears that had challenged human dominance in the wilderness. Future generations would learn from their experience while continuing to share the land with the magnificent and dangerous creatures that made Alaska unique. In the end, the incident at Terror Bay Peninsula represented both the beauty and the terror of true wilderness, a reminder that in some places on Earth, humans remained potential prey for apex predators that had ruled the land for millennia. The lesson was not to avoid the wilderness, but to approach it with the respect, preparation, and humility that it demanded. The final words belonged to Thomas Kanatak, spoken during the memorial service as the sun set over the waters of the Gulf of Alaska. The land remembers everything that happens here. The bear is gone, but the land remembers his power and his danger. We must remember too, so that we can live safely with the animals that share our home. As darkness fell over Terabay Peninsula that evening, the surviving friends and family of the victims left the area where 8 people had died, fighting against one of nature's most formidable predators. They carried with them the memory of those who had been lost, the lessons learned from their sacrifice, and the knowledge that the wilderness would always be both beautiful and dangerous for those brave enough to enter its domain. The story of Takuka was complete, but the larger story of humans and bears sharing the Alaskan wilderness would continue, shaped by the lessons learned from one terrible month when a single animal had reminded an entire region that in the wilderness the rules of civilization did not always apply. The wilderness belonged to the bears, and humans entered it only as guests. Guests who must always remember that their hosts possessed the power of life and death over any who forgot their place in the natural order. The next stories. Grizzly destroys patrol car, kills sheriff deputy, September 30, 2024. The morning mist clung to the Gallatin Valley like a shroud, obscuring the jagged peaks of the Bridger Mountains as Deputy Laura Marie Green adjusted her rearview mirror and checked her watch. 5:47 a.m. The radio crackled with the familiar static of early morning dispatch chatter, but the frequencies remained mostly quiet in Gallatin County. It was the kind of September morning that reminded her why she'd transferred from the chaos of Minneapolis PD to this seeming paradise in southwestern Montana 3 years ago. The air was crisp with the promise of autumn, and the aspen leaves had begun their transformation from summer green to burnished gold, creating a tapestry across the mountainsides that never failed to take her breath away. Laura had always been drawn to wide-open spaces, growing up in the cramped suburbs of St. Paul. She dreamed of mountains and endless skies, of a place where she could breathe without feeling the weight of urban life pressing down on her shoulders. At 32, she'd finally found that place, though the transition hadn't been without its challenges. Rural policing was different from city work in ways the academy had never prepared her for. Here, she might go hours without seeing another human being, patrolling vast stretches of wilderness where cell service was spotty at best, and backup could be 40 minutes away on a good day. Her patrol route this morning would take her along Highway 191 south toward the Yellowstone boundary, then west on the back roads that wound through prime grizzly habitat. The area had seen increased bear activity over the past month, with reports of property damage, livestock predation, and several uncomfortably close encounters between humans and the massive predators that ruled this landscape. Just last week, the Johnson family had lost 2 calves to what tracks suggested was an exceptionally large male grizzly, and there had been 3 separate incidents of bears breaking into cabins along the Gallatin River corridor. The radio squawked to life as Laura guided her Ford Police Interceptor around a sweeping curve lined with lodgepole pines. Unit 47, this is dispatch. The voice belonged to Sandra Mills, a 20-year veteran of the emergency services who'd seen everything from avalanche rescues to armed standoffs in the backcountry. Laura keyed her radio. Unit 47, go ahead, Sandra. We've got a report of a possible break-in at the Whitman cabin on Forest Service Road 121. Caller says there's significant property damage and what looks like bear sign all around the structure. Want you to check it out and coordinate with Fish, Wildlife and Parks if necessary. Copy that. ETA approximately 15 minutes. Laura made a mental note to grab her bear spray from the equipment bag in her trunk before approaching the cabin. The Whitman place was isolated, sitting on 40 acres of private land, surrounded by the Gallatin National Forest. She'd been there twice before on similar calls, and both times the culprit had been black bears drawn by improperly stored garbage. but the recent reports suggested they might be dealing with something more serious this time. As she drove, Laura's mind wandered to the phone call she'd had with her mother the night before. Margaret Green had been asking again when Laura was going to come to her senses and move back to civilization. The subtext was always the same. When was she going to find a nice man, settle down, and give her mother the grandchildren she'd been not so subtly requesting for the past decade? Laura loved her mother, but explaining the appeal of this life to someone who viewed anything beyond the Minneapolis city limits as basically the frontier was an exercise in futility. The truth was, Laura had found something here that she'd never had in the city, a sense of purpose that went beyond simply reacting to humanity's worst impulses. Out here, she was often the first line of defense between civilization and the wild, a role that required not just law enforcement skills, but wilderness expertise, wildlife knowledge, and the kind of calm judgment that could mean the difference between life and death when you're an hour from the nearest hospital and dealing with a situation no academy training could fully prepare you for. Her radio crackled again. "All units, be advised we're getting reports of a large bear, possibly a grizzly, in the Highway 191 corridor near mile marker 27. Multiple callers reporting an animal matching the description of the bear involved in recent livestock predation. Exercise extreme caution." Laura checked her GPS. Mile marker 27 was about 8 miles south of her current position, not far from where she'd be after checking the Whitman cabin. She made another mental note to contact Montana Fish, Wildlife and Parks biologist Dr. James Mitchell when she got back to the station. Mitchell had been tracking the movements of several problem bears in the area, including one massive male that locals had dubbed Brutus after it had demolished a deer hunting cabin near Hyalite Creek. The turnoff for Forest Service Road 121 appeared ahead, marked by a weathered wooden sign that most tourists would miss entirely. Laura slowed and turned onto the gravel road, her patrol car's suspension working hard as she navigated the washboard surface, carved by summer thunderstorms and the heavy trucks that serviced the scattered cabins and hunting camps in this remote valley. The road wound through dense stands of Douglas fir and aspen, following an ancient elk migration route that had been converted to human use sometime in the 1940s. 5 miles up the road, Laura caught her first glimpse of the Whitman cabin through the trees. What she saw made her reach for her radio immediately. The structure was still standing, but barely. The front porch had been completely destroyed, with support beams snapped like matchsticks and the roof sagging at a dangerous angle. Deep claw marks scored the log walls, and what appeared to be a substantial hole had been torn in the side of the building where a window used to be. "Dispatch, Unit 47, I'm on scene at the Whitman cabin, and we definitely have major bear damage here. Looks like the animal gained entry to the structure. I'm going to need Fish, Wildlife and Parks on scene, and you might want to notify the Forest Service as well. This is beyond anything I've seen before." "Copy, Unit 47. I'll contact Dr. Mitchell and see if he can respond. What's your assessment of the threat level?" Laura stepped out of her patrol car and immediately noticed the overwhelming smell of musk and decomposition that seemed to hang in the still morning air. The ground around the cabin was churned into a moonscape of massive paw prints, some so deep they looked like they'd been pressed into wet concrete. "Sandra, based on the size of these tracks and the extent of the damage, I'd say we're looking at an exceptionally large and aggressive animal. The tracks suggest a grizzly in the 800-pound range, possibly larger." She pulled on latex gloves and retrieved her digital camera from the equipment bag, beginning to document the scene with the methodical thoroughness that had made her one of the most respected deputies in the county. Each photograph was carefully framed and labeled, building a comprehensive record that would be crucial for the wildlife biologists and, potentially, for insurance purposes. The claw marks on the cabin walls were unlike anything Laura had encountered in her 3 years of rural law enforcement. They extended nearly 8 feet up the log walls, carved so deep that wood chips and sawdust still littered the ground beneath them. The spacing between individual claw marks suggested an animal with massive paws, and the force required to create such damage spoke to incredible strength and determination. Moving closer to the cabin, Laura noticed something that made her stomach tighten with apprehension. Mixed in with the overwhelming bear scent was another odor, metallic and sharp. Blood, and not the relatively clean smell of a deer or elk kill, but something more complex, more disturbing. She'd encountered enough crime scenes to recognize the distinct iron tang of human blood. Dispatch, Unit 47. I need you to contact the Whitmans immediately and verify their whereabouts. I'm detecting what may be blood sign at the scene, and I need to know if anyone should have been at this cabin recently. Stand by, Unit 47. The radio fell silent, except for the ambient static that seemed to underscore the ominous quiet of the forest around her. Laura found herself listening intently to every sound, every rustle of wind through the aspen leaves, every distant crack of a branch that might indicate the presence of the animal responsible for this destruction. The front door of the cabin hung open, twisted on its hinges by what must have been tremendous force. Laura approached carefully, her hand resting on the grip of her service weapon, even though she knew it would be virtually useless against an 800-pound grizzly. The interior of the cabin was a chaos of overturned furniture, shredded upholstery, and scattered debris. The refrigerator had been pulled away from the wall and completely destroyed, its contents scattered across the kitchen floor in a fetid mess that buzzed with flies. But it was the back bedroom that made Laura's blood run cold. The wooden floor was stained dark with what was unmistakably blood, and deep gouges in the floorboard suggested a struggle of unimaginable violence. Scattered throughout the room were fragments of clothing, human hair, and something else that Laura's mind initially refused to process. She'd found the source of the metallic smell. Her radio erupted with Sandra's voice, unusually tight with concern. Unit 47. I've got Dale Whitman on the phone. He says they drove up to the cabin yesterday afternoon to close it up for the winter. His wife Ellen was with him. They were supposed to drive back to Bozeman this morning, but he can't reach her on her cell phone. He's en route from town now, ETA about 20 minutes. Laura felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that accompanied the transition from routine patrol to serious emergency. Sandra, I need you to stop Mr. Whitman before he gets to the cabin. This is now a potential crime scene, and I can't have civilians contaminating the evidence. Also, get me an ETA on Dr. Mitchell and any other Fish, Wildlife and Parks personnel who can respond. Copy that. Also, Unit 47, Sheriff Brennan is en route to your location. ETA 15 minutes. Sheriff Michael Brennan was a 30-year veteran of Montana law enforcement who'd seen everything the wilderness could throw at a person. If he was responding personally, it meant the situation was being taken very seriously at the highest levels. Laura continued her documentation of the scene, fighting against the growing certainty that Ellen Whitman was not going to be found alive. The radio crackled again. Unit 47, this is Dr. Mitchell. I'm about 10 minutes from your location. Can you give me a preliminary assessment of what we're dealing with? Dr. James Mitchell was considered one of the foremost experts on grizzly bear behavior in the Northern Rockies. A tall, lean man in his mid-50s, with prematurely grey hair and the weathered complexion of someone who spent most of his time outdoors, Mitchell had been studying the bear populations of the greater Yellowstone ecosystem for over 2 decades. His research on human-bear conflicts had been instrumental in developing many of the safety protocols currently used by law enforcement and wildlife management agencies throughout the region. Dr. Mitchell, Based on track evidence and the extent of structural damage, I believe we're looking at an adult male grizzly in the 800 to 900 pound range. The animal appears to have been inside the cabin for an extended period, and there's significant blood evidence suggesting a possible human fatality. I've got one missing person, a 58-year-old female named Ellen Whitman. Jesus, okay, I'm bringing my full field kit, and I'll coordinate with the incident commander when I arrive. Has anyone checked the surrounding area for the victim? Laura looked out at the thousands of acres of dense forest that surrounded the cabin and felt a chill that had nothing to do with the September morning air. Not yet. I'm waiting for backup before conducting any extended search. This animal is clearly still in the area and appears to be exhibiting extremely aggressive behavior. The sound of approaching vehicles broke the oppressive silence of the forest. Sheriff Brennan's white Suburban appeared first, followed closely by Dr. Mitchell's Fish, Wildlife and Parks truck with its distinctive logo and emergency lighting. Both men stepped out of their vehicles with the practiced efficiency of professionals who'd responded to similar scenes before, though Laura suspected none of them had ever dealt with anything quite like this. Sheriff Brennan was an imposing figure, even at 61 years old, standing 6'4", with the kind of presence that could command a room or calm a dangerous situation with equal effectiveness. His grey moustache and weathered face spoke to decades of dealing with everything from domestic disputes to wilderness rescues, and his reputation for competence under pressure was legendary throughout southwestern Montana law enforcement circles. "Laura, give me the situation." His voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to taking charge in crisis situations. "Sir, we have one missing person, Ellen Whitman, age 58. Significant blood evidence inside the cabin suggests a fatal encounter with what Dr. Mitchell and I believe is an exceptionally large male grizzly. The animal appears to have spent considerable time inside the structure and may still be in the immediate area." Dr. Mitchell was already examining the tracks around the cabin with the focused intensity of a scientist gathering data. "Mike, these prints are from the largest grizzly I've encountered in 23 years of fieldwork. Look at this." He gestured to a particularly clear track pressed into a patch of muddy ground near the cabin's rear entrance. "That pad is over 9 inches wide. We're looking at an animal that could easily exceed 900 pounds. Sheriff Brennan studied the track, his expression growing increasingly grim. "Jim, is this the same bear that's been causing problems around the Johnson Ranch?" "Almost certainly. The track measurements match, and the behavior pattern is consistent with what we've been seeing. This animal has lost its natural fear of humans, and it's becoming increasingly aggressive. We've got a confirmed cattle predator that's now escalated to property destruction and—" He gestured toward the blood-stained cabin interior. "Possibly worse." Laura's radio interrupted their conversation. "Unit 47, this is dispatch. Dale Whitman is at the roadblock, and he's demanding to know what's happening. How do you want me to handle this?" Sheriff Brennan took Laura's radio. "Sandra, this is Sheriff Brennan. Mr. Whitman is not to proceed to this location under any circumstances. Tell him we're conducting a search and rescue operation and that we'll brief him as soon as it's safe to do so. Also, I need you to contact the coroner's office and have them standing by, and get me Detective Rodriguez from the Major Crimes Unit." The mention of the coroner and detective confirmed what they all suspected but hadn't yet verbalized. This had moved beyond a search and rescue operation to a potential homicide investigation, even if the perpetrator wasn't human. Dr. Mitchell finished his initial assessment of the tracks and approached the 2 law enforcement officers. "Based on the sign around the cabin, I believe the bear approached from the northeast, probably following the creek drainage. The tracks show it circled the building several times before making entry, which suggests a level of calculation that's extremely concerning in a wild animal." "Could someone have been training this bear?" Laura asked. Some of the property damage seems almost deliberate, like the animal knew exactly what it was doing. It's possible, but more likely we're dealing with a habituated animal that's learned to associate human structures with food sources. The problem is that this bear has crossed a line that very few grizzlies ever cross. Most bears, even aggressive ones, will avoid prolonged contact with humans. This animal appears to be actively seeking out human interaction, which makes it extraordinarily dangerous. The sound of another approaching vehicle announced the arrival of Detective Maria Rodriguez, a 12-year veteran of the Major Crimes Unit whose expertise in evidence collection and scene processing was considered among the best in the state. Rodriguez was a compact woman in her early 40s with short black hair and the kind of intense focus that made her particularly effective at extracting information from complex crime scenes. "Sheriff, what's our situation?" Rodriguez stepped out of her unmarked sedan and immediately began pulling on protective gear. "We have a missing person, probable fatality, and a crime scene that's unlike anything any of us have dealt with before. The perpetrator is an 800 to 900-pound grizzly bear that may still be in the area." Rodriguez paused in the process of adjusting her equipment vest. "Jesus Christ. Okay, what do we know about the victim?" Ellen Whitman, 58 years old, came up here yesterday afternoon with her husband to close the cabin for the winter. Husband drove back to Bozeman last night, expected her to follow this morning. She never arrived and isn't answering her phone. And we're certain she's not just lost in the woods somewhere. Dr. Mitchell gestured toward the cabin. "Maria, you need to see the scene inside. There's enough blood evidence to suggest a fatal encounter, and the behavior pattern of this bear suggests it's not going to simply leave the area. We're dealing with an animal that's actively hunting humans." Rodriguez spent the next 40 minutes conducting a preliminary examination of the cabin interior, photographing and measuring every piece of evidence with the same methodical approach she'd use for any homicide investigation. The challenges were obvious from the beginning: distinguishing between bear damage and actual evidence, protecting the integrity of biological samples in an outdoor environment, and conducting the investigation while maintaining awareness that the perpetrator might return at any moment. "Sheriff, I'm finding human tissue samples throughout the rear bedroom and what appears to be a significant blood trail leading from that room toward the back door of the cabin. But here's what's really disturbing. The pattern of damage suggests the victim was alive for at least part of the encounter." The implication hung in the air like a physical presence. Laura found herself imagining Ellen Whitman's final moments and had to force herself to focus on the professional requirements of the situation. Dr. Mitchell looked up from his examination of claw marks on the cabin's exterior wall. "That's consistent with grizzly bear attack patterns. Unlike other predators that typically kill quickly, bears will often immobilize their prey and then feed while the victim is still alive. It's one of the most horrific ways a person can die." Sheriff Brennan made a decision that would prove crucial in the hours to come. "Jim, I need you to contact your office and get every available wildlife officer in the region heading this way. We're going to treat this as an active manhunt until we locate this animal. Laura, I want you to coordinate with dispatch and establish a security perimeter around this area. Nobody gets through without authorization." "What about the search for Mrs. Whitman?" Rodriguez asked. "If there's any chance she's still alive." "Based on the evidence inside that cabin, I don't think we're conducting a rescue operation anymore," Sheriff Brennan replied grimly. "But we need to locate the remains for her family's sake, and we need to find this bear before it kills someone else." The radio in Sheriff Brennan's vehicle erupted with urgent chatter. Sandra's voice cut through the static with obvious tension. All units, we have reports of a large bear on Highway 191 near mile marker 23. Multiple callers reporting an animal in the roadway acting aggressively toward vehicles. State Patrol is en route." Laura felt her stomach drop. Mile marker 23 was less than 4 miles from their current location, directly between the crime scene and the main highway that connected Bozeman to Yellowstone National Park. If this was the same bear, it was moving toward more populated areas and showing absolutely no fear of humans or vehicles. Dr. Mitchell was already heading toward his truck. "Mike, I need to get down there immediately. If this animal is confronting vehicles on the highway, we're looking at a potential mass casualty situation. Take Laura with you. I'll coordinate the search for Mrs. Whitman's remains and maintain scene security here." Laura grabbed her radio and equipment bag, her mind racing through the protocols for dealing with an aggressive grizzly in a populated area. The reality was that there were no good options. Tranquilizing an animal of this size required precise placement and could take 15 to 20 minutes to take effect, during which time the bear would be even more dangerous. Lethal force was often the only viable option, but killing a grizzly bear involved federal regulations, multiple agencies, and paperwork that could take months to resolve. As they drove toward Highway 191, Dr. Mitchell filled Laura in on the larger context of what they were dealing with. "This bear has been on our radar for the past 6 weeks. We've had reports of property damage, livestock predation, and increasingly bold behavior around human habitation. The problem is that once a grizzly loses its natural fear of humans, it's almost impossible to modify that behavior." "What about relocating it?" "We tried that with a similar bear 3 years ago. Transported it 150 miles into the Bob Marshall Wilderness. It was back in populated areas within 2 weeks and had to be destroyed after it broke into an occupied camping trailer and injured 2 people. They crested a hill and saw the situation ahead of them. Highway 191 was completely blocked by what appeared to be every law enforcement vehicle in Gallatin County. In the center of the roadway, clearly visible even from a distance, was a massive grizzly bear that seemed utterly unconcerned by the presence of humans, vehicles, and flashing emergency lights. State Patrol Sergeant Tom Bradley was coordinating the scene with the calm professionalism of someone who dealt with wildlife encounters before, but Laura could see the tension in his posture as they approached his command post. Bradley was a 25-year veteran of Montana State Patrol who'd worked everything from fatal vehicle accidents to search and rescue operations, but dealing with an aggressive grizzly on a major highway was outside even his extensive experience. "Sergeant Bradley, what's the situation?" Dr. Mitchell approached with his field equipment and tranquilizer rifle. "Dr. Mitchell, thank God you're here. That bear has been in the roadway for the past 20 minutes. It's approached several vehicles, including my patrol car, and shows absolutely no fear response. We've got traffic backed up for miles in both directions, and I'm running out of non-lethal options." The bear in question was unlike anything Laura had ever seen. Even at a distance of 200 yards, its massive size was intimidating. The animal's shoulder height appeared to be nearly 4 feet, and its distinctive dished face and prominent shoulder hump marked it unmistakably as a mature male grizzly. But it was the bear's behavior that was truly disturbing. Instead of fleeing from the obvious human presence, it seemed to be actively investigating the vehicles and people arrayed around it. "Tom, I need to get close enough for a clean shot with the tranquilizer, but that's going to put me within the animal's charge distance. Can your people provide cover if this goes wrong?" Sergeant Bradley nodded towards several officers positioned behind their vehicles with rifles drawn. "We've got multiple shooters in position, but Jim, you know as well as I do that stopping a charging grizzly is not guaranteed even with multiple hits." Dr. Mitchell checked his tranquilizer rifle and loaded a dart containing enough immobilizing drug to drop a 1,000-pound animal. "Okay, I'm going to approach from the west side of the highway using that patrol car for cover. If the bear charges, do not hesitate to use lethal force. Laura watched through binoculars as Dr. Mitchell began his careful approach toward the massive predator. The bear seemed to notice his movement and turned to face him directly, rising up on its hind legs to get a better view. Standing upright, the animal was enormous, easily over 8 feet tall, and radiating an aura of raw power that was visible even from a distance. The tranquilizer dart struck the bear in the shoulder with a soft thud that was audible even over the idling engines of the emergency vehicles. The bear's reaction was immediate and terrifying. Instead of the confused retreat that might be expected from a wild animal, it dropped to all fours and charged directly toward Dr. Mitchell with shocking speed. Laura had read about the speed of charging grizzlies, but witnessing it firsthand was a completely different experience. The bear covered the 75 yards between its initial position and Dr. Mitchell's location in less than 6 seconds, moving with a fluid power that seemed to defy its massive size. Dr. Mitchell dove behind a state patrol vehicle just as multiple rifle shots rang out across the highway. The bear stumbled but did not go down, its momentum carrying it past Dr. Mitchell's position and toward the line of law enforcement vehicles. Laura watched in horror as the animal slammed into the side of Sergeant Bradley's patrol car with enough force to rock the entire vehicle on its suspension. The impact was accompanied by the distinctive sound of breaking glass and crumpling metal. More shots followed, and finally the massive predator collapsed onto the asphalt, its body twitching as the combination of bullet wounds and tranquilizer drugs took effect. The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of car alarms triggered by the impact and the heavy breathing of the officers who just witnessed one of the most dangerous wildlife encounters any of them would ever experience. Dr. Mitchell emerged from behind the patrol car, visibly shaken but uninjured. "Is everyone okay?" Sergeant Bradley surveyed the damage to his vehicle and shook his head in amazement. "Jim, that bear hit my car hard enough to deploy the side airbags. I've never seen anything like it." Laura approached the fallen grizzly with a mixture of professional curiosity and primitive fear. Even unconscious and dying, the animal was awe-inspiring. Its massive paws were larger than dinner plates, tipped with claws that seemed designed for destruction. The shoulder muscles that had powered its charge were enormous, and the sheer bulk of the creature spoke to a predator that had no natural enemies in this ecosystem. "Dr. Mitchell, is this definitely the same bear from the cabin?" Mitchell was already taking measurements and tissue samples for later analysis. "Based on size, behavior, and location, I'm confident this is our animal. But Laura, this is just the beginning of our problems." "What do you mean?" "A grizzly this size and this aggressive doesn't develop overnight. This bear has been learning to associate humans with food for weeks or months, and it's been successful enough to become completely fearless. The question now is whether there are other bears in the area that have learned the same lessons." "Keep!" The radio in Laura's patrol car erupted with Sandra's voice, tight with urgency. All units! We have reports of a second large bear at the Whitman cabin site. Sheriff Brennan is requesting immediate backup." Laura felt the blood drain from her face as the implications hit her. They'd assumed they were dealing with a single rogue animal, but the possibility of multiple problem bears changed everything. The Gallatin Valley was home to one of the densest grizzly populations in the lower 48 states, and if several animals had learned to associate humans with food sources, they could be looking at a crisis that would require resources far beyond what the county could provide. Dr. Mitchell was already heading toward his truck. "Laura, we need to get back to the cabin immediately. If we're dealing with multiple bears, the search for Mrs. Whitman's remains just became exponentially more dangerous." The drive back to the Whitman cabin took on an entirely different character than their trip to the highway. What had begun as a routine investigation had evolved into something approaching a full-scale emergency response. Laura found herself checking and rechecking her equipment, mentally reviewing everything she knew about grizzly bear behavior and tactics for dealing with multiple aggressive animals. Dr. Mitchell, in your professional opinion, what are we looking at here? Worst-case scenario. Mitchell's expression was grim as he navigated the winding forest road. Worst case. We're looking at a learned behavior pattern that could spread throughout the local bear population. Once one animal demonstrates that humans can be successfully hunted as prey, other bears may adopt the same strategy. We could be dealing with a fundamental shift in predator-prey relationships that would make this entire region uninhabitable for humans. The radio crackled with updates from the scene ahead. Sheriff Brennan's voice carried a tension that Laura had never heard before. Dr. Mitchell, the second bear is significantly larger than the first. We've got Detective Rodriguez and 2 fish, wildlife and parks officers trapped inside the cabin, and this animal is actively trying to get to them. Laura felt her training kick in as they approached the cabin site. Multiple emergency vehicles were positioned around the perimeter, their occupants clearly maintaining a respectful distance from whatever was happening near the structure. Through the trees, she could see movement that resolved into the distinctive bulk of another massive grizzly, this one even larger than the bear they'd just dealt with on the highway. Sheriff Brennan met them at his improvised command post behind his Suburban. "Jim, this bear showed up about 15 minutes after you left. Rodriguez was inside the cabin collecting evidence when it came through the back door. She and the fish, wildlife and parks officers managed to barricade themselves in the front bedroom, but that door isn't going to hold for long." The sound of splintering wood punctuated his words, followed by human voices shouting from inside the cabin. Laura could see the massive bear through the cabin's front window, its bulk filling the entire doorframe as it worked to demolish the interior door that was the only thing protecting the trapped officers. "What about the windows?" Laura asked. "Can we extract them through the windows?" "The bedroom they're in faces the back of the cabin, and we'd have to get past the bear to reach them. We're looking at options, but none of them are good." Dr. Mitchell was assembling another tranquilizer rifle from his equipment case. "Mike, I'm going to try the same approach we used on the highway, but this is going to be more difficult. The confined space means the dart needs to be perfectly placed, and if this bear charges, there's nowhere for anyone to go." The sound of breaking wood from inside the cabin was getting louder and more frequent. Laura could hear Detective Rodriguez's voice shouting instructions to her companions, but couldn't make out the specific words. The urgency in her tone was unmistakable. "Sheriff, we need to do something now. That door isn't going to hold much longer." Sheriff Brennan made another decision that would prove crucial. "Jim, take your shot. We'll provide cover fire if needed. Laura, get on the radio and see if we can get a helicopter in here for possible medical evacuation." Dr. Mitchell approached the cabin with his tranquilizer rifle, using the same careful tactics that had worked on the highway. But this bear was different. Instead of the focused aggression they'd seen from the first animal, this grizzly seemed to be operating with a level of intelligence that was deeply disturbing. It had positioned itself inside the cabin in a way that made a clear shot nearly impossible, and its behavior suggested an awareness of the humans outside that went beyond simple predator instinct. The tranquilizer dart struck the bear in the hip as it worked to destroy the bedroom door. The animal's reaction was immediate and terrifying. Instead of the blind charge they'd witnessed on the highway, this bear turned and came through the cabin's front door with calculated precision, moving directly toward Dr. Mitchell with the fluid efficiency of a predator that had successfully hunted human prey before. The gunfire that erupted from the law enforcement perimeter was sustained and accurate, but the bear's massive size and the confined space made accurate shooting difficult. Laura managed to extract herself from her position just as the tranquilizer drugs began to take effect. The massive predator collapsed near the cabin's entrance, its weight shaking the ground. Detective Rodriguez emerged from the cabin, followed by the two Fish, Wildlife and Parks officers, all three visibly shaken by their experience. Rodriguez's usually composed demeanor was replaced by something approaching shock as she surveyed the massive carcass of the bear that had nearly killed them. Mike, that animal was actively hunting us. It wasn't reacting to a perceived threat or defending territory. It was trying to get to us specifically, and it was smart enough to use tactics. Dr. Mitchell was examining the second bear carcass with the focused intensity of a scientist trying to understand an unprecedented phenomenon. Maria's right. This bear's behavior was more sophisticated than anything I've encountered in 2 decades of fieldwork. Look at this. He gestured toward deep gouges in the cabin's doorframe. These claw marks are deliberate, focused. This animal was using tools, using the structure of the building to trap its prey. Sheriff Brennan surveyed the scene with the expression of someone trying to process information that challenged everything he thought he knew about the natural world. Jim, I need you to give me your professional assessment. Are we dealing with an isolated incident, or is this part of a larger pattern? Based on what we've seen today, I believe we're dealing with a learned behavior that may be spreading through the local bear population. These animals have discovered that humans can be successfully hunted as prey, and they're adapting their hunting strategies accordingly. If I'm right, every human in this region is potentially at risk. Laura's radio crackled with another urgent transmission from dispatch. All units, we have multiple reports of bear activity throughout the Gallatin Valley. Highway Patrol is reporting a third bear sighting near the Gallatin Gateway, and we're getting calls about property damage and aggressive bear behavior from 6 different locations. The scope of what they were dealing with was becoming clear, and it was far beyond anything local law enforcement was equipped to handle. Laura found herself thinking about the hundreds of people who lived in isolated cabins and rural properties throughout the valley, many of them elderly or otherwise vulnerable. If aggressive grizzlies were actively hunting humans across the region, the potential for mass casualties was enormous. Sheriff Brennan was already on his radio, calling for assistance from every available agency. Sandra, I need you to contact the Montana State Emergency Operations Center and request immediate assistance. We're dealing with a potential mass casualty situation involving multiple aggressive grizzly bears. I also need contact with the National Guard and any federal agencies that might have resources to help us. Dr. Mitchell looked up from his examination of the bear carcasses. Mike, I'm recommending that we issue an immediate evacuation advisory for all rural areas in the Gallatin Valley. Until we understand the full scope of what we're dealing with, nobody should be alone in isolated areas. The radio in Laura's patrol car erupted with a transmission that made everyone freeze. A panicked voice, clearly that of a civilian, was breaking through the emergency frequencies. Is anyone there? Please, someone help us. There's a bear trying to get into our house. It's huge, and it's not afraid of us. We're trapped upstairs, and it's breaking down our front door. Sandra's voice came back immediately. Caller, this is Gallatin County Dispatch. What is your location? We're at 14275 Gallatin River Road, about 8 miles south of the highway. The bear has been here for 20 minutes, and it's getting more aggressive. Our front door won't hold much longer. Laura felt her stomach drop as she recognized the address. The Morrison family lived at that location, Robert and Susan Morrison, both in their 70s. Along with their adult daughter Jennifer, who was visiting with her 2 young children. If an aggressive grizzly was targeting that house, they were looking at a potential catastrophe involving multiple generations of a family. Sheriff Brennan didn't hesitate. Laura, you and Dr. Mitchell get to that location immediately. Take whatever backup is available. I'll coordinate additional resources and continue the search for Mrs. Whitman's remains. The drive to the Morrison property was a tense 15 minutes through winding rural roads that suddenly seemed fraught with danger. Every stand of trees could conceal a massive predator, and every curve in the road might reveal another emergency situation. Laura found herself checking her rearview mirror constantly, looking for signs of the additional backup that might mean the difference between life and death for the Morrison family. Dr. Mitchell was silent during the drive, focused on loading tranquilizer darts and checking his equipment. The 2 bear encounters they'd already dealt with had depleted his supply of immobilizing drugs, and Laura knew that if they faced another aggressive animal, their options would be severely limited. The Morrison property appeared ahead through the trees, and Laura's heart sank as she saw the scene that was unfolding. A massive grizzly, possibly even larger than the 2 they'd already encountered, was systematically destroying the front of the house. The animal had already torn through the front door and was working to enlarge the opening enough for its massive bulk to enter the structure. "Dr. Mitchell, that bear is going to be inside the house in the next few minutes. We don't have time for a careful approach." Mitchell nodded grimly. "Laura, I need you to use your patrol car to distract the animal while I get into position for a shot. But if this goes wrong, don't hesitate to use lethal force." Laura had never used her patrol car as a weapon before, but the situation called for immediate action. She accelerated toward the house, using her emergency lights and siren in an attempt to draw the bear's attention away from the Morrison family. The massive predator turned toward the approaching vehicle with what appeared to be more curiosity than fear, rising up on its hind legs to get a better view of this new development. Standing upright, the bear was enormous, easily over 9 feet tall and radiating the kind of primal power that made Laura's hands shake on the steering wheel. But instead of retreating from the approaching vehicle, the animal dropped to all fours and began moving toward her with the same calculated aggression they'd witnessed from the previous bears. Dr. Mitchell's tranquilizer dart struck the bear center mass just as Laura realized that her patrol car was about to be attacked by nearly 1,000 pounds of enraged grizzly. The impact came with devastating force, crushing the front end of her vehicle and deploying both airbags simultaneously. Laura felt herself thrown against her safety restraints as the patrol car was lifted partially off the ground by the force of the collision. The bear's momentum carried it over the hood of the cruiser and into the windshield, which exploded inward in a shower of safety glass. For a terrifying moment, Laura found herself face to face with the massive predator, separated by only a few feet and the twisted metal of her vehicle's frame. The bear's eyes held an intelligence that was deeply disturbing, as if it understood exactly what it was doing and why. Gunfire erupted from multiple directions as backup units arrived on scene, but the bear's massive size and the confined space made accurate shooting difficult. Laura managed to extract herself from the destroyed patrol car just as the tranquilizer drugs began to take effect. The massive predator collapsed onto the hood of her vehicle, its weight completing the destruction of what had been a $42,000 piece of law enforcement equipment. The silence that followed was broken by voices from inside the Morrison house. Robert Morrison appeared at a second-floor window, his elderly face pale with shock, but clearly relieved to see law enforcement personnel on his property. "Mr. Morrison, is everyone in your family okay?" Laura called up to him. "We're all fine, but Deputy, that bear has been trying to get into our house for almost half an hour. It wasn't just looking for food, it was hunting us." Dr. Mitchell was examining the 3rd bear carcass with an expression of growing concern. "Laura, this animal shows the same behavioral patterns as the previous 2. Calculated aggression, use of tactics, and absolutely no fear of humans or human artifacts. We're definitely dealing with a learned behavior that's spreading through the local population. Laura's radio crackled with another urgent transmission. All units, this is Montana State Patrol. We have reports of bear activity on Interstate 90 near the Livingston exit. Multiple animals in the roadway, and at least one appears to be pursuing a stopped vehicle. The scope of the crisis was expanding beyond anything local authorities could handle. Laura found herself wondering how many people were going to die before they could get the situation under control. The Gallatin Valley was home to nearly 100,000 residents, many of them living in exactly the kind of isolated rural settings that made them vulnerable to the kind of predation they were witnessing. Sheriff Brennan's voice came through the radio, with the tone of someone who'd made a difficult decision. All units, I'm requesting immediate assistance from the Montana National Guard and any federal agencies with experience in wildlife management emergencies. We're declaring a local state of emergency and implementing evacuation procedures for all rural areas in Gallatin County. Dr. Mitchell looked up from his examination of the bear carcass. Mike, I'm recommending that we contact the University of Montana Wildlife Biology Department and any other research institutions that might have insights into this kind of behavioral change. What we're seeing here is unprecedented, and we need all the expertise we can get. The sound of approaching helicopters announced the arrival of resources from outside the county. Laura watched as 2 Montana National Guard helicopters appeared over the tree line, followed by what appeared to be a news helicopter from one of the Billings television stations. The story was going to be statewide news within hours, and probably national news before the end of the day. Dr. Mitchell, what do we tell people? How do we keep them safe when we don't fully understand what we're dealing with? Mitchell's expression was grim as he packed up his equipment. Right now, the only safe advice is to avoid all rural areas until we can determine the full scope of the problem. These bears have learned to hunt humans as prey, and they're adapting their tactics in real time. Until we know how many animals are involved and how far the behavior has spread, nowhere in this region is completely safe. Laura looked at the destroyed patrol car that had been her mobile office for the past 3 years and tried to process the reality that her morning routine patrol had uncovered what wildlife experts were calling the most significant change in grizzly bear behavior in recorded history. The destroyed vehicle, with the massive bear carcass still draped across its hood, had become a stark symbol of humanity's changing relationship with one of North America's most powerful predators. Dr. Chen approached with preliminary findings from her analysis of the bear carcasses. Deputy Green, what you witnessed today is likely just the beginning. Based on tissue analysis and behavioral observation, these animals have been systematically hunting large mammals for weeks or months. They've learned that humans represent not just a food source, but a preferred food source that's relatively easy to obtain. What does that mean for people living in bear country? It means that fundamental assumptions about wildlife behavior that have guided human settlement patterns for centuries are no longer valid. These bears see humans as prey, and they're adapting their hunting strategies to maximize their success rate. Until we can determine how to reverse this behavioral change, large portions of grizzly habitat may be too dangerous for human habitation. Laura looked out at the dark forest that surrounded the Morrison property and tried to imagine a world where humans were actively hunted by 800-pound predators capable of destroying vehicles and buildings with their bare claws. The radio chatter around her continued to report additional sightings and encounters throughout the region, suggesting that the crisis was far from over. Her phone buzzed with another message from her mother. The news is saying there are killer bears in Montana. Please come home. Laura stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back, Mom, I can't come home. I'm needed here. As she sent the message, Laura realized that something fundamental had changed in her understanding of the place she'd chosen to call home. The Gallatin Valley had always been beautiful, but dangerous, a landscape where natural forces commanded respect and caution. But now it had become something else entirely. A battlefield where humanity's position at the top of the food chain was being challenged by predators that had learned to see humans not as a threat to be avoided, but as prey to be hunted. The destroyed patrol car behind her was more than just a damaged vehicle. It was evidence of a new reality, where the relationship between humans and wildlife had shifted in ways that no one had anticipated and few were prepared to handle. As emergency response teams continued to arrive and evacuation efforts expanded throughout the night, Laura found herself wondering whether the Gallatin Valley she'd fallen in love with 3 years ago would ever be the same again. The radio crackled with another urgent transmission as the first light of dawn began to appear over the Bridger Mountains. All units, we have confirmation of additional bear activity near the Bozeman city limits. Multiple animals exhibiting coordinated hunting behavior. All available personnel respond immediately. Laura looked at her destroyed patrol car one more time, then climbed into a borrowed vehicle to continue responding to what had become the most significant wildlife emergency in Montana history. Deputy Laura Green had started her shift that morning, expecting a routine day of rural law enforcement. Instead, she'd become one of the first responders to a crisis that would fundamentally change how humans and grizzly bears coexisted in the northern Rockies. The 850-pound grizzly that had destroyed her $42,000 patrol car was dead, but the behavioral changes it represented were spreading through the bear population with alarming speed. As Laura drove toward the next emergency call, she realized that September 30th, 2024, would be remembered as the day that humans learned they were no longer the undisputed apex predators in one of North America's last great wilderness areas. The story of what happened in the Gallatin Valley that day would be studied by wildlife biologists, emergency management professionals, and law enforcement agencies for years to come. But for Laura, it would always be remembered as the morning when everything she thought she knew about the natural world changed forever, symbolized by the twisted metal and broken glass of a patrol car that had been no match for a predator that had learned to hunt the most dangerous game of all.